Good evening, my friends, and welcome to American Memory Lane. Tonight, I invite you to sit back, close your eyes, and let me take you on a little journey back to a time when the air smelled of gasoline and freedom. It was the summer of 1969. A summer that changed everything. For me, and maybe for the world, this is the story of youth, of loss, of love, and the road that led us home again. Let's begin. That summer, the air smelled like gasoline and freedom, and I didn't know it would be the last time I'd see my brother alive. 50 years have passed since then, but I can still feel the heat rising off the asphalt at Miller's gas station on Route 9. I can still hear the tinny sound of Creedence Clearwater Revival crackling through the radio my father kept on the service counter. Proud Mary played at least 5 times a day that summer, and every time it came on, I'd tap my foot against the all-stained concrete and dream about somewhere else, anywhere else but Millfield, Indiana. I was 17 that June, 17 and restless in the way only a boy on the edge of manhood can be. My hands were always dirty from checking oil levels and changing tires, my white t-shirts permanently stained despite my mother's best efforts with bleach and prayers, but I didn't mind the work, not really. The gas station was my father's domain, his kingdom of 2 pumps and a single-bay garage, and working there meant I got to watch the world roll by, even if it rarely stopped. Millfield wasn't the kind of town people came to, it was the kind they passed through on their way to somewhere better. Population 3,247, according to the faded sign at the town limits. We had one main street, 2 churches, a diner called Rosie's where the coffee was always burnt, and a 5 and dime where Mrs. Henderson had been selling the same dusty merchandise since Eisenhower was president. The most exciting thing that had happened in Millfield in the past decade was when the Hendersons' barn caught fire in '64, and even that turned out to be from faulty wiring, not the teenage rebellion everyone had hoped for. But that summer, the summer of 1969, everything felt different. There was electricity in the air, a sense that the whole world was changing, even if Millfield was determined to stay exactly the same. My brother Tommy had been gone since March. He'd enlisted the previous fall, right after his 18th birthday, before the draft could take him. "At least this way I get to choose," he'd said, standing in our kitchen in his new uniform, looking so much older than he had any right to look. My mother had cried into her apron. My father had shaken his hand with that firm grip that men of his generation thought communicated everything words couldn't. I'd punched him in the shoulder and called him an idiot. I wish now I'd hugged him instead. Tommy wrote letters every week, sometimes twice a week. They arrived in thin airmail envelopes covered in stamps I didn't recognize, postmarked from places I had to look up in the atlas at the public library. Da Nang, Quang Tri Hu, the letters were full of things he couldn't say and things he said too much. He complained about the heat, the food, the mosquitoes the size of small birds. He asked about baseball scores and whether Jenny Morrison was still dating Bob Tucker. He never mentioned the fighting, never talked about what he did all day, but I could read between the lines. The spaces between his words were louder than anything he actually wrote. I kept every letter in a shoebox under my bed, and every Sunday afternoon after church and after the big family dinner my mother insisted on, even though it was just the 3 of us now, I'd sit at the kitchen table with a cold glass of lemonade and write back. I told him about the gas station, about the customers who came through, about how Mr. Peterson's Buick was on its last legs, and everyone knew it except Mr. Peterson. I told him about the music on the radio, and how the college kids were starting to grow their hair long and wear beads, even in Indiana. I told him that nothing ever happened in Millfield, which was exactly what he wanted to hear, I think. He needed to know that some things stayed the same. I never told him how scared I was, how I watched the news every night with my parents, Walter Cronkite's grave voice filling our living room with casualty counts and place names that meant nothing to us except fear, how my mother's hands shook every time she heard a car pull up in the driveway, terrified it might be a telegram, how my father had aged 10 years in the 6 months since Tommy left. And I never told him about Sarah. The first time I saw Sarah Brennan that summer was a Tuesday afternoon in early June. School had let out the week before, and I was working the day shift at the station, which meant I'd been there since 6 in the morning and would be there until 6 at night. My father did the books in the tiny office that smelled like motor oil and old coffee. I manned the pumps. It was one of those perfect Midwest summer days, the kind where the sky is so blue it almost hurts to look at it, and the clouds drift by like lazy thoughts. The temperature was climbing toward 90 and the heat made everything shimmer and dance. I'd already served maybe 20 customers, mostly locals I'd known my whole life. Mrs. Patterson getting her weekly $5 of regular, young Billy Morrison on his Schwinn bicycle buying a Coke from the machine out front. Ed Winters in his pickup, complaining about the price of gas like he did every single week, as if I controlled the rates personally. Then a car I didn't recognize pulled up to the full-service pump, a white Chevrolet Impala convertible with the top down and California plates. California plates in Millfield, Indiana. That alone was enough to make me stare. But then the driver's door opened and she stepped out. She had honey-colored hair that fell past her shoulders in waves, and she wore white sunglasses pushed up on top of her head like a movie star. Her dress was yellow, bright yellow like sunshine or daffodils or all the good things that color represents, and it had little white flowers printed on it. She wore sandals that showed her toes, painted the color of coral. She looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine, out of a television commercial for something too expensive for people like us to buy. She looked like she belonged anywhere but here. "Hi there," she said, and her voice had a warmth to it that matched her smile. "Could you fill it up, please? Regular's fine." I realized I'd been staring with my mouth half open like some kind of slack-jawed yokel, and I felt heat rise to my face that had nothing to do with the summer sun. "Yes, ma'am," I managed, my voice cracking slightly on the second word. "Smooth, Jack, real smooth." She laughed, not mean but friendly, like we were sharing a private joke. "Ma'am, how old do you think I am? I'm Sarah, what's your name?" "Jack," I said, unscrewing her gas cap and fitting the nozzle into the tank. "Jack Miller." "Well, Jack Miller, it's nice to meet you." She leaned against the side of her car, and I couldn't help but notice she was watching me with genuine interest, like I was something more than just the kid who pumped her gas. "How far is it to Indianapolis from here?" "About 40 miles east," I said, watching the numbers spin on the pump. "You lost?" "Not lost," she said, "just finding my way. I'm driving cross-country. Started in Los Angeles 2 weeks ago. I'm heading to New York, but I'm taking the long route, seeing America." She said it like that, America, with a kind of reverence and excitement that made it sound like an adventure, not just a country. "By yourself?" The question came out before I could stop it, and I immediately worried I'd sounded judgmental. Girls didn't do things like that, not in 1969, at least not girls from Millfield. But Sarah just smiled wider. "By myself. My parents think I've lost my mind. My mother cried for 3 days before I left, but I graduated from UCLA in May and I thought, why not see the country before I have to settle down and become a responsible adult?" She shrugged, and there was something in that gesture, something free and unafraid, that made my chest feel tight. The pump clicked off, 23 gallons. I hung up the nozzle and wiped my hands on my jeans. "That'll be $7.80, I said. She reached into her purse, a woven leather bag that looked handmade, and pulled out a $10 bill. When I went to get her change from the cash box my father kept in the office, she called after me. "Hey, Jack Miller." I turned back. "Is there anywhere good to eat around here? I'm starving, and I've been living on gas station snacks and diner food for 2 weeks straight." I thought about it. The truth was, Millfield didn't have much to offer a girl from California who'd been to college and was driving across America by herself. But she was looking at me with those eyes, brown, I noticed now, the color of root beer, and I heard myself saying something I hadn't planned to say. "Rosie's Diner has the best pie in 3 counties, I told her. "My shift ends at 6, I could show you if you want, meet you there." The moment the words left my mouth, I wanted to take them back. She was probably going to laugh, probably going to say thanks but no thanks, probably going to get in her car and drive away, and I'd spend the rest of the summer kicking myself for being so bold, so stupid, so. "I'd like that," Sarah said, and her smile was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. 6 o'clock at Rosie's, it's a date." She took her change, climbed back into her white Impala and drove away down Route 9, her honey-colored hair streaming behind her in the wind. I stood there for a full minute after she'd disappeared, my heart hammering in my chest like it was trying to escape. My father came out of the office wiping his hands on a rag. "Who was that?" "Nobody," I said, which was a lie, "just a customer." But even as I said it, I knew Sarah Brennan wasn't just a customer, wasn't just nobody. She was something else entirely, something dangerous and exciting, and completely outside the bounds of my small, predictable life. I didn't know it then, but that Tuesday afternoon was the moment everything began to change. That was the moment my last innocent summer started to slip away, replaced by something bigger and more complicated than anything I'd known before. That was the moment I started to understand what Tommy meant when he wrote in his last letter, "You think you know who you are until the world shows you different. Then you've got to decide what kind of man you're going to be." I spent the last 2 hours of my shift in a state of nervous energy that made my hands shake every time I had to make change. I checked my watch so many times that my father finally asked me if I had somewhere important to be. "Just meeting a friend for dinner," I said, trying to sound casual. He raised an eyebrow but didn't press. My father wasn't the pressing type. He was a man of silences and steady work, of routines that never varied and expectations that were never spoken but always understood. He'd run the gas station since before I was born, took over from his father before that. In the Miller family, you worked hard, kept your head down and didn't cause trouble. You didn't dream too big or reach too far beyond your station. But that afternoon, watching the clock tick towards 6, I felt something stirring in my chest that my father's careful, cautious life couldn't contain. At 5 minutes to 6, I washed my hands 3 times with the gritty soap we kept by the garage bay, scrubbing at the oil under my fingernails until my skin was red and raw. I changed out of my work shirt into the clean t-shirt I kept in my locker, white, plain, nothing special, but at least it didn't smell like gasoline. I ran my fingers through my hair, looking at my reflection in the small mirror that hung crooked on the office wall. I looked like what I was, a 17-year-old kid from nowhere, with nothing to offer a girl like Sarah Brennan except a recommendation for pie. "You look fine," my father said from behind me, and I jumped. I hadn't heard him come in. "Whoever she is, she already said yes to dinner, stop fussing." I felt my face go hot. "I'm not." "Jack," he put a hand on my shoulder, heavy and warm. "Go, have a good time, be home by 11, your mother will worry." I nodded, not trusting my voice, and headed out into the early evening. Rosie's Diner was a 10-minute walk from the gas station, right in the heart of what passed for downtown Millfield. It was a silver railcar-style building with red vinyl booths and a long counter with swivel stools that squeaked when you turned. The neon sign in the window buzzed and flickered, announcing good food in letters that had been pink once but had faded to tired coral. Rosie herself, real name Rose Henderson, no relation to the Five and Dime Hendersons, had been running the place since before I was born. She was 60-something, round as a dumpling, with grey hair she kept in a neat bun and a sharp tongue that could cut you down or build you up depending on her mood. When I pushed open the door, the little bell above it jangling, I saw that Sarah was already there. She'd taken a booth by the window and she'd changed clothes, now wearing blue jeans and a white blouse with embroidery around the collar. Her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, and without the movie star sunglasses she looked younger, more real, more like someone I might actually be able to talk to without my tongue tying itself in knots. She waved when she saw me, and I slid into the booth across from her, my heart doing that hammering thing again. "You made it," she said, and she sounded genuinely pleased. "I was worried you might change your mind." "Why would I change my mind?" She shrugged, playing with the paper napkin in front of her. "I don't know, maybe you thought about it and decided it was weird, some strange girl passing through town asking you to dinner." "I asked you," I reminded her, "and you're not weird, you're—" I searched for the right word and settled on interesting. She laughed at that, a real laugh that made her eyes crinkle at the corners. "Interesting, I'll take it." Rosie appeared at our table with her order pad and a knowing look that made me want to sink through the floor. "Well, well," she said, looking from me to Sarah and back again. "Jack Miller on a date, never thought I'd see the day. Who's your friend?" "I'm Sarah," Sarah said, extending her hand like she was meeting the mayor, not a diner owner in small-town Indiana. "Sarah Brennan, I'm just passing through." Rosie shook her hand and I saw something in her face soften. Maybe it was Sarah's politeness, or maybe it was something else, recognition perhaps of a kindred spirit. Rosie had been young once too, had left Millfield for Chicago back in the 30s, only to return when the Depression hit. She understood the pull of elsewhere. "Well, Sarah Brennan, who's just passing through, welcome to Rosie's. What can I get you?" "Jack tells me you have the best pie in 3 counties, Sarah said, "but maybe I should eat dinner first." "Smart girl, I recommend the meatloaf, best in Indiana, though I know Jack here's going to order a cheeseburger because that's all boys his age ever order." She looked at me with mock severity. "Am I wrong?" "Cheeseburger and fries," I admitted, and both women laughed. "I'll have the meatloaf," Sarah said, "and a Coke, please." 2 Cokes, I added, "and Rosie will definitely want pie after." "Cherry or apple?" "One of each," Sarah suggested, looking at me for confirmation. "We can share." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Sharing pie felt intimate somehow, more intimate than I'd expected this evening to be. Rosie bustled away, and suddenly it was just the 2 of us in the booth, and I realized I had no idea what to say. In all my nervous anticipation about seeing Sarah again, I hadn't actually planned out the conversation. What did you talk about with a girl from California who was driving across the country by herself? What could I possibly say that would be interesting to someone who'd been to college, who'd seen the ocean, who'd probably done 1,000 things I'd only read about in books? But Sarah, bless her, didn't seem to notice my panic. She leaned forward, her elbows on the table, her chin resting on her hands, and said, "So tell me about Millfield, Jack Miller. What's it like growing up here?" And somehow, with that simple question, she opened a door I didn't know had been closed. I told her about Millfield, really told her, in a way I'd never talked about my town to anyone. I told her about how everybody knew everybody, which was comforting and suffocating in equal measure, how you couldn't skip church without the whole town knowing by Monday, how the biggest scandal in recent memory was when the Reverend's daughter got pregnant by a boy from the next county over, and how they'd gotten married in a quiet ceremony that nobody talked about but everybody knew about. I told her about the gas station, about working alongside my father since I was 12 years old, learning to change oil and rotate tires, and make small talk with customers who'd known me since I was in diapers. I told her about summer nights sitting on the front porch with my family, listening to the crickets and watching the fireflies dance in the darkness, my mother shelling peas or snapping beans, my father smoking his pipe, Tommy talking about baseball or cars or someday getting out of Indiana and seeing the world. I didn't mean to mention Tommy, but his name slipped out naturally, the way it always did. He was woven into every memory I had, every story about my life. And once I'd mentioned him, Sarah asked about him, and I found myself talking about my brother in a way I hadn't been able to with anyone else. He enlisted in March, I said, dragging a French fry through ketchup without eating it. He's in Vietnam now, infantry, he writes letters, but I trailed off, not sure how to finish the sentence. But it's not the same, Sarah said softly, having him gone. No, it's not. I looked up at her and something in her eyes told me she understood, really understood. Do you have brothers or sisters? A brother older like yours, Michael, she paused, choosing her words carefully. He's at Berkeley, graduate school. He's very involved in the protests, the anti-war movement. My parents don't know what to do with him. He and my father don't speak anymore. The way she said it, I could hear the pain underneath. Family fractures even in California. Do you think they're right? I asked. The protesters. It was a bold question, maybe too bold. In Millfield, you didn't question the war. You supported the troops, you flew the flag, you believed America was right because America was America. My father had fought in World War II, had a Purple Heart in a drawer somewhere that he never took out. Tommy had enlisted to serve his country. Questioning the war felt like questioning them. But Sarah didn't flinch from the question. She thought about it, really thought, her brow furrowed slightly. Think, she said slowly, that it's more complicated than right or wrong. I think the people protesting care about the soldiers as much as anyone, maybe more because they don't want them dying in a war we can't win. And I think the soldiers are doing what they believe is right, what they've been told is right. And I think, she paused again, I think everybody's scared, Jack. The protesters and the soldiers and the families back home. We're all just scared and trying to do our best with what we know. It wasn't an answer, not really. But somehow it was the most honest thing anyone had said to me about the war in all the months since Tommy left. Our food arrived and we ate and talked and talked and ate. Sarah told me about California, about the beaches and the mountains, about Los Angeles sprawling out forever in all directions, about the campus at UCLA and the classes she'd taken. She'd studied English literature, loved poetry, could quote entire passages from Whitman and Frost and poets whose names I'd never heard. She told me about her drive across the country, about sleeping in her car at rest stops and cheap motels, about the people she'd met and the places she'd seen. She'd stopped at the Grand Canyon and cried because it was so beautiful. She'd gotten lost in New Mexico and ended up having dinner with a Navajo family who'd invited her in when they saw her sitting by the side of the road looking at a map. She'd driven through the Dust Bowl and seen poverty that made her California privilege feel shameful and wrong. It's not the America they show on TV, she said, pushing her empty plate aside. It's bigger and more complicated and more beautiful and more broken than anything I imagined, and I needed to see it. I needed to understand what this country actually is, not just what people say it is. And what is it? I asked. She smiled, sad and wondering at the same time. I'm still figuring that out. Rosie brought the pie, warm cherry and apple, with vanilla ice cream melting on top and 2 forks. We ate slowly, sharing bites, and I felt like I was in some kind of dream. Girls like Sarah didn't show up in Millfield. They especially didn't sit in Rosie's diner eating pie with gas station attendants who'd never been further than Indianapolis. But here she was, here we were. What about you? Sarah asked, scraping up the last bit of cherry pie. What are your plans after this summer? It was the question I'd been dreading, the question everyone in Millfield asked boys my age. What are you going to do? Where are you going? Who are you going to be? I don't know, I admitted. My father expects me to take over the gas station eventually. It's what Millers do, but I stopped, surprised at what I was about to say. I want something else, I just don't know what yet. That's okay, Sarah said. Not knowing is okay. You're 17, Jack, you're supposed to not know. Tommy knew, I said. He always knew he wanted to serve, wanted to do something that mattered. And what do you want? No one had ever asked me that before, not like this, not like my answer actually mattered. I looked out the window at Millfield's Main Street. at the familiar buildings and the familiar cars and the familiar faces passing by. I looked at my reflection in the glass, ghostly and insubstantial. And then I looked at Sarah, at this girl who'd driven 2,000 miles just to see what was out there, just to understand. I want to write, I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. Stories, maybe, or journalism, something that captures how things really are, like you said, not the TV version, the real version. I'd never said that out loud before, never told anyone, not even Tommy. It felt dangerous and foolish and absolutely true. Sarah's face lit up. Jack, that's wonderful. Do you write? Can I read something? I keep notebooks, just observations, things I see at the gas station, conversations I overhear, nothing special. I bet it is special, she said. I bet it's exactly what people need to read. Real voices, real America. We stayed at Rosie's until almost 9, long after we'd finished the pie, just talking. When we finally left, Rosie gave me a knowing wink that made my ears burn, but I didn't care. Sarah and I walked slowly back toward the gas station where her car was parked, and the summer night was perfect, cool and clear, the stars bright above us, the air smelling of cut grass and honeysuckle. "Where are you staying tonight?" I asked. "I saw a motel on the edge of town, the Sleepy Time Motor Lodge. I'll get a room there, start fresh in the morning." We reached her car and she leaned against it, looking up at the stars. "Thank you, Jack," she said. This was exactly what I needed. A real evening with a real person in a real town, not just passing through but actually connecting, you know. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I entirely understood. All I knew was that I didn't want her to leave. Not tomorrow morning, not ever. "Will you?" I hesitated. "Will you come by the station tomorrow, before you go? I could show you some of my writing if you want." "I'd love that," Sarah said. "I'll come by around 10. "I'll be there." She smiled, and then she did something I didn't expect. She stood on her toes and kissed my cheek, quick and soft and warm. "Good night, Jack Miller. Thank you for showing me Millfield." She got in her car, and I watched her drive away toward the Sleepy Time Motor Lodge, her taillights disappearing into the darkness. I walked home in a daze, my hand touching the spot on my cheek where she'd kissed me, and I felt like the world had just expanded somehow, like there was more to life than I'd understood before, like maybe, just maybe, I could be more than a gas station attendant in a town of 3,247 people. When I got home, my mother was waiting up, sitting in her chair under the lamp, mending one of my father's work shirts. "You're home," she said, smiling. "How was your evening?" "Good," I said. "Really good, Mom." She studied my face, and whatever she saw there made her smile widen. "That's nice, sweetheart. There's leftover pot roast in the icebox if you're still hungry." I kissed the top of her head and went upstairs to my room. I pulled out my current notebook from under my mattress, spiral-bound, half filled with observations and scraps of overheard dialogue and descriptions of ordinary moments I thought might be worth remembering. And I started to write about Sarah Brennan, about the girl in the white Impala with California plates, about how sometimes magic shows up in the most unexpected places. I wrote until past midnight, until my hand cramped and my eyes burned. I didn't know it yet, but that was the night I stopped being just Jack Miller, the gas station kid. That was the night I started becoming someone else. I woke up the next morning to sunlight streaming through my bedroom window and the sound of my mother singing in the kitchen below. She only sang when she was happy, old hymns mostly, songs from her childhood in Kentucky before she'd married my father and moved north to Indiana. The sound of her voice, clear and sweet, drifting up through the floorboards, made me smile before I even opened my eyes. Then I remembered Sarah, the diner, the kiss on my cheek, the promise that she'd come by the station at 10. I shot out of bed like I'd been launched, suddenly wide awake despite having stayed up past midnight writing. I had 3 hours before she'd arrive, 3 hours to make myself presentable, to pick out which pages from my notebooks to show her, to figure out how to be the kind of person a girl like Sarah Brennan might want to spend more time with. Downstairs, my mother was making pancakes, the real kind, from scratch, not from a box. The kitchen smelled like butter and maple syrup and strong coffee. My father sat at the table reading the Indianapolis Star, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose, still in his undershirt even though he'd be opening the station in an hour. "Morning," I said, trying to sound casual, like my heart wasn't racing at the thought of seeing Sarah again. "Good morning, sleepyhead," my mother said cheerfully. "Pancakes will be ready in 2 minutes. Sit down, eat while they're hot." I poured myself a cup of coffee. I'd only started drinking it that summer, felt very adult doing so, and sat across from my father. He lowered his newspaper and looked at me over his glasses. "You're up early for a boy who got in past 10, he observed. Couldn't sleep, I said, which was true enough. The girl coming back to the station today. I should have known he'd figure it out. My father didn't miss much. Maybe, I said. She mentioned she might stop by before heading out of town. My mother set a plate of pancakes in front of me, 3 thick ones, golden brown, with butter melting into pools on top. What's her name, this girl? Sarah Brennan. She's from California, driving cross-country. By herself, my mother's voice held a note of concern mixed with admiration. That's awfully brave or foolish, I can't decide which. Both probably, I said, drowning my pancakes in syrup. But she's smart, Mom, really smart. She went to college and everything. My parents exchanged a look, one of those married couple looks that communicated a whole conversation without words. Well, my mother said finally, I hope she stays safe. It's a dangerous world out there for a young woman alone. She said it lightly, but I heard what she wasn't saying. It was a dangerous world, period. For young women driving cross-country, yes, but also for young men fighting in jungles half a world away. For everyone, really, in this strange summer of 1969, when it felt like everything solid was becoming uncertain. I ate quickly, barely tasting the food, then ran back upstairs to get ready. I showered, shaved the thin stubble on my chin that barely qualified as facial hair, put on my cleanest jeans and a blue button-down shirt my grandmother had given me for Christmas. I slicked my hair back with water, then decided that looked too formal and messed it up again. I went through my notebooks, trying to decide what to show Sarah, and finally settled on a few pages. A description of a thunderstorm I'd written last summer, a character sketch of Old Man Peterson and his dying Buick, and a short piece about watching my father work on an engine, his hands moving with the confidence of 30 years' experience. By the time I got to the station at 8:30, I was a nervous wreck. My father took one look at me and shook his head, but he was smiling. Son, if you're going to be useless all morning mooning over this girl, you might as well make yourself useful by organizing the supply closet. It's been needing attention for 6 months. So I spent the next hour and a half in the cramped closet that smelled like rubber and WD-40, arranging cans of oil and boxes of spark plugs and air filters, checking inventory, wiping down shelves, all the while keeping one eye on the clock and one ear tuned to the sound of cars pulling up outside. 9:30 came and went, 9:45, 9:50. At 5 minutes to 10, I heard it, the distinctive rumble of the Impala's engine. I dropped the rag I was holding and practically ran out of the closet, then forced myself to slow down, to walk casually out to the pump area like I just happened to be there. Sarah pulled up to the full-service pump, and when she got out of the car, she was wearing the yellow dress again, the one from yesterday, with her hair loose around her shoulders. She had a paper bag in one hand and a thermos in the other. "Morning, Jack Miller," she called out. "I brought breakfast, or second breakfast, I guess, since it's almost 10. Hope you like donuts." "I love donuts," I said, probably too enthusiastically. "Good, there's a little bakery 2 blocks from the motel. I went for a walk this morning and found it. Best glazed donuts I've ever had, and I'm from Los Angeles, so I've had a lot of donuts." She set the bag and thermos on the hood of her car. "Also, I made coffee in my motel room. It's terrible, but it's caffeinated, and I thought we could sit and you could show me your writing." My heart did that stuttering thing again. "You really want to read it?" "Jack, I've been thinking about it since last night. Of course I want to read it." I looked over at the station office. Through the window I could see my father bent over his ledgers. As if sensing my gaze, he looked up, caught my eye and gave me the smallest nod, permission, or maybe encouragement. With my father it was hard to tell the difference. "There's a spot," I said, "behind the station, nothing special, just a place I go sometimes on my lunch break. We could sit there." Laid the way. I grabbed a blanket from the trunk of my father's car, the old wool one we kept for emergencies, and led Sarah around behind the station to a spot where the ground sloped down slightly toward Miller's Creek. It wasn't much of a creek, especially not in summer when it was barely a trickle, but there were trees here, old cottonwoods that provided shade, and the grass was soft. You could hear the water if you listened, a gentle babbling sound that was peaceful in a way that made you forget you were 50 feet from Route 9. I spread out the blanket and we sat, and Sarah opened the paper bag to reveal 6 glazed donuts that looked like they'd come straight from heaven. "So," she said, handing me a donut and pouring coffee into the thermos cap that doubled as a cup, "let me see what you've got." With shaking hands I pulled out the folded pages from my back pocket. They looked so shabby suddenly, so inadequate, just notebook paper with my scrawled handwriting, full of crossed-out words and margin notes. What had I been thinking? Sarah had gone to college, had probably read real writers, real literature. What did I have to offer except the observations of a 17-year-old kid who'd never been anywhere or done anything? But she took the pages like they were precious, unfolded them carefully, and started to read. I ate my donut and tried not to watch her face, tried not to interpret every small change in expression. The coffee was terrible, like she'd warned, bitter and weak, but I drank it anyway because I needed something to do with my hands. She read slowly, taking her time, and the silence stretched out long enough that I started to panic. This was a mistake. I should never have shown her. I should never have. Jack, her voice was soft, almost reverent. She looked up at me and there were tears in her eyes. Jack, this is beautiful. It's nothing really, just. Stop, she held up a hand. Don't do that, don't diminish this. This piece about your father, about watching his hands work on an engine. Do you understand what you've captured here? It's not just about fixing a car. It's about legacy and love and the way we communicate without words. It's about everything fathers and sons can't say to each other but feel anyway. I stared at her, not quite believing what I was hearing. And this one about the thunderstorm, the way you described the light changing, the smell of rain on hot asphalt, the electricity in the air before the storm breaks. Jack, you made me feel it. I was there. That's what good writing does, it transports you. Really? My voice came out small, hopeful. Really? She set the pages down carefully on the blanket between us. You have a gift, Jack, a real gift. You see things other people miss, and you can put them into words that make those things matter. That's rare. Something loosened in my chest, something I hadn't known was tight. All my life I'd felt like I was supposed to be something specific. My father's son, Tommy's brother, a miller, someone who'd take over the gas station and live the life that was expected. But Sarah saw something else in me. She saw possibilities. I've never shown anyone before, I admitted, except now you. I'm honored, she said, and she meant it. Will you keep writing? Will you pursue this? I don't know how. College costs money we don't have, and even if it didn't, my father needs me at the station. And with Tommy gone, I trailed off, the familiar weight of responsibility settling back onto my shoulders. Sarah was quiet for a moment, picking at her donut. When she spoke again, her voice was gentle but firm. Can I tell you something I've learned on this trip? I nodded. The world is bigger than we think it is, bigger than what our families expect, bigger than what our towns allow. And the only way to find your place in it is to go looking. You can't discover who you're meant to be if you never leave the place that tells you who you're supposed to be. But what about responsibility? What about your life, Jack? What about what you want, what you're meant for? She leaned forward, intense now. Look, I love my parents, they're good people, but they had this whole life planned out for me: get married to some nice boy from a good family, have Barbies, join the country club, play bridge on Tuesdays. And maybe that's a fine life for some people, but it's not my life. It took me 21 years to figure out I could say no, that I could choose something different. And what did you choose? She smiled, spreading her arms to encompass the blanket, the creek, the sky, everything. This, adventure, uncertainty, the chance to figure out who I am when nobody's telling me. It's terrifying, Jack, but it's also the most alive I've ever felt. We sat there in the dappled shade of the cottonwoods, eating donuts and drinking terrible coffee, and I felt something shifting inside me. Not a decision, not yet, but a possibility. A whisper that maybe, just maybe, there could be another way to live. How long are you staying? I asked. In Millfield. Sarah tilted her head, considering. I was going to leave today, push on toward Ohio, maybe make it to Pittsburgh by the weekend. Was, she confirmed, but I'm thinking maybe I'll stay a little longer, a day or two, if, she paused, suddenly uncertain in a way I hadn't seen from her before. If that would be okay, I mean, I don't want to intrude or make you feel like you have to entertain me or anything. Stay, I said, the word coming out more forceful than I'd intended. Please stay. I could show you around, introduce you to people. It's not much Millfield, but, I searched for the right words, but I'd like you to see it. Through my eyes, I mean, the way I see it. Her smile was like sunrise. I'd like that too. And so it was decided. Sarah Brennan, who was supposed to be just passing through, would stay in Millfield for a while longer. Neither of us could have known then what that decision would mean, what it would set in motion. All we knew was that there was something between us, not romance exactly, or not just romance. It was deeper than that. Recognition, maybe. The way you feel when you meet someone who understands the language you speak, even when you're not speaking the same words. We packed up the blanket and the donut bag and walked back to the station. My father was outside now, helping Mrs. Patterson with her usual $5 of regular. He nodded at Sarah, polite but reserved, and I could see him taking her measure, trying to understand what this California girl was doing, spending her morning with his son. I should let you get back to work, Sarah said, but what time do you finish today? 6 o'clock. How about I pick you up? We could drive around, you could show me the area, maybe watch the sunset from somewhere. There's a spot, I said, Miller's Point, about 5 miles out of town. You can see for 20 miles from up there. My brother and I used to ride our bikes there when we were kids. Miller's Point for the Millers, Sarah said, grinning. Fitting, I'll be here at 6. She drove away, and I stood there watching until her car disappeared, then turned to find my father looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. She seems like a nice girl, he said finally. Smart. She is. Just be careful, Jack. Girls like that, they're not meant for places like this. They're meant for bigger things. I wanted to argue, wanted to say that maybe I was meant for bigger things too, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I just nodded and went back to work, checking oil levels and filling gas tanks and making small talk with customers who'd known me all my life. But inside, I was counting down the hours until 6 o'clock, until I could see Sarah again and show her my world, and maybe start to imagine a different kind of future than the one I'd always assumed was waiting for me. The afternoon crawled by slowly, each hour feeling like 3. Around 4 o'clock, Mr. Harrison came in with his Ford pickup, complaining about a noise in the engine. My father and I spent an hour tracking it down, a loose belt that needed tightening, nothing serious. While we worked, my father talked about engines in that way he had, speaking to the truck as much as to me, his hands gentle and sure on the machinery. Watching him, I thought about what Sarah had said about my writing, about capturing the way my father communicated through his hands, and I understood, maybe for the first time, that my father's work was its own kind of poetry. He might never write a word, but he understood engines the way I wanted to understand language, intimately, intuitively, with a craftsman's love for getting things exactly right. Dad, I said as we were washing up afterward, did you ever want to do something else, besides the station? He was quiet for a long moment, drying his hands on a rag. When I was young, he said finally, younger than you, I wanted to be a pilot, wanted to fly planes, see the world from up above, thought it would be freedom, you know, the sky. I'd never known this. In 17 years, my father had never mentioned it. What happened? The war happened. I went to Europe, flew supply runs, saw my friends shot down. When I came home, I'd had enough of flying. Your grandfather needed help with the station, and I needed something solid, something on the ground. He looked at me, his eyes serious. But Jack, just because I chose this life doesn't mean you have to. You understand that, right? Before I could answer, a customer pulled up, and the moment passed. But his words stayed with me, turning over and over in my mind like stones in a tumbler, slowly revealing new facets. At 6 o'clock sharp, Sarah pulled up in her white Impala, and I climbed in beside her, and we drove out of Millfield toward Miller's Point as the day began its slow fade into evening. The summer stretched ahead of us, full of possibility and promise, and I had no idea that everything was about to change. No idea at all. Miller's Point wasn't really a point at all. It was a flat-topped hill about 5 miles east of town, accessible by a winding dirt road that branched off Route 9. Tommy and I had discovered it when I was 8 and he was 9, riding our bikes on a summer day not unlike this one, exploring the back roads of Ashtabula County the way boys did back then, when parents didn't worry so much about where their children went as long as they were home by dinner. From the top, you could see the patchwork of Indiana farmland stretching out in every direction, fields of corn and soybeans, the occasional farmhouse like a toy in the distance, the silver ribbon of the Whitewater River cutting through it all. On clear days, you could almost see Indianapolis, or at least the suggestion of it, a smudge on the eastern horizon. Tommy and I used to come here to talk about the future. He'd talk about joining the service, seeing the world, becoming someone who mattered. I'd listen and nod and never quite know what to say about my own dreams because back then I didn't think I had any. I was just Tommy's little brother, following in his wake, content to be in his shadow. Now I was here with Sarah, and Tommy was 9,000 miles away, and everything felt both exactly the same and completely different. Sarah parked near the edge of the clearing, and we got out into the golden evening light. The sun was still an hour from setting, hanging fat and orange in the western sky. A warm breeze carried the smell of growing things, of earth and green life. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals, its cry sharp and lonely. "Oh, Jack," Sarah breathed, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. "This is beautiful, this is really beautiful." "Tommy and I used to pretend we were explorers," I said, walking to the edge where the ground dropped away. "Like we discovered some new territory that nobody else knew about. Even though Old Man Miller, my great-grandfather, this was his land originally. The point's named after him, not us." "Still counts," Sarah said, coming to stand beside me. "It's yours now in the ways that matter, the memories you made here." We sat on the grass at the edge, our legs dangling over the slope, and watched the landscape glow in the evening light. Sarah had brought a transistor radio from her car, and she turned it on low. The Beach Boys were singing "Wouldn't It Be Nice," and the sweet harmonies floated across the hilltop like a benediction. "Tell me about Tommy," Sarah said. "Really tell me, what's he like?" I picked at the grass, trying to find the words. He's good, that's the simplest way to put it. Good in a way that's not boring or fake. He genuinely cares about people, wants to help, wants to do the right thing. When we were kids, he was always the one defending the underdog, standing up to bullies, making sure everyone got included in games. Sounds like a hero, Sarah said softly. Yeah, he is, I guess, but he's also just. Tommy, he laughs at stupid jokes. He can't carry a tune to save his life. He's terrible at poker because his face always gives him away. He cried when our dog died even though he was 16 and thought he was too old for crying. I smiled at the memory. He's my brother, you know, he's supposed to just be there always. The idea that something could happen to him. I couldn't finish the sentence. Sarah reached over and took my hand, laced her fingers through mine. Her palm was warm and soft, and the simple comfort of it made my throat tight. When did you last hear from him? She asked. Last week, he wrote about the monsoons, how everything's always wet and nothing ever dries. He asked about baseball scores, wanted to know if the Cubs had any chance this year. I laughed, but it came out bitter. The Cubs, like that matters when he's dodging bullets in the jungle. It matters because it's normal, Sarah said. It's something from home, from before. When everything around you is chaos and fear, normal things are what keep you sane. They're reminders that there's still a world where people worry about baseball and not survival. I looked at her, surprised by her understanding. Your brother, I said. Michael, the one protesting the war, do you worry about him? Every day, she admitted. Not about bullets, but about what it's doing to him, being so angry all the time. He's consumed by it, Jack, the war, the injustice, the fight, it's all he talks about. He's not really Michael anymore, he's just a cause walking around in my brother's body. She squeezed my hand. Sometimes I think the war destroys everyone it touches, not just the soldiers. It radiates out in waves, breaking families, turning brothers against fathers, making everyone choose sides. The radio switched songs, Creedence Clearwater Revival Now, Fortunate Son, and the irony wasn't lost on either of us. Do you think it'll ever end? I asked. The war. I don't know, maybe, but even when it ends on paper, I don't think it'll really end. Not for the people who fought it, not for the families who lost sons and brothers and fathers. Some wars keep going long after the shooting stops. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the music and the wind and the hawk still circling above us. The sun dropped lower, painting the clouds pink and gold and purple. It was the kind of sunset that poets write about, the kind that makes you believe in something larger than yourself. Can I ask you something? Sarah said eventually, and you can tell me if it's too personal. Okay. Do you resent him, Tommy, for enlisting, for leaving you to deal with everything here? The question surprised me with its directness, but also with its insight. How had she known to ask that? How had she seen what I barely admitted to myself? Sometimes, I said quietly. Is that terrible? He's over there risking his life, being brave, and I'm here pumping gas and resenting him for it. It's human, Sarah said. You can love someone and still be angry at them. You can be proud of their courage and still wish they'd stayed home. Feelings aren't simple, Jack, they don't follow rules. My parents pretend everything's fine, I continued, the words spilling out now that I'd started. We have Sunday dinner and talk about the weather and the gas station and Mrs. Henderson's arthritis, and nobody mentions that there's an empty chair at the table. Nobody talks about how my mother jumps every time a car pulls up, or how my father reads the casualty lists in the paper every morning even though he tries to hide it from us. We're all just pretending. What would happen if you stopped pretending? I don't know, it might break something, it might break everything. Sarah nodded slowly. My family's the opposite, we talk about the war constantly. Every dinner is a fight about politics and morality and whether the protesters are heroes or traitors. My father calls Michael a coward. Michael calls my father a fascist. My mother cries and begs everyone to just stop, to just be a family again. But we can't, we don't know how anymore. So what's the answer? I asked, silence or shouting? Maybe neither, maybe, she paused thinking. Maybe the answer is truth, real, honest truth even when it's uncomfortable. Not pretending everything's fine but not attacking each other either. Just saying what you actually feel and trusting that love is strong enough to hold it. The sun touched the horizon and the world turned to flame. We watched it sink slowly, inevitably taking the day with it. The first stars began to appear in the darkening east, faint and far away. I'm glad you stayed, I said. In Millfield, I mean, I'm glad you didn't just drive through. Me too, Sarah said. I almost didn't, you know. When I left the motel this morning, I had my bags packed, car loaded, ready to go. But then I thought about you, about your writing about. She trailed off, smiling. About how it felt to talk to someone who actually listens, really listens, not just waits for their turn to talk. And I thought, what's the rush? New York isn't going anywhere. But this moment right here, right now, this is once in a lifetime. She turned to look at me, her face half in shadow now, half gilded by the last of the sunset. And maybe it was the light, or the moment, or the way her hand felt in mine, but I leaned forward and kissed her. It wasn't like the movies. It was awkward and tentative, and I wasn't sure if I was doing it right, and my heart was hammering so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. But Sarah kissed me back soft and sweet, and when we pulled apart she was smiling. "I've been wondering if you'd do that," she said. Was it okay?" "It was perfect," she said. "Very Jack Miller, honest and nervous and exactly right." We kissed again, and this time it was easier, more natural. The radio played on something slower now, a ballad I didn't recognize, and the stars came out one by one above us, and for a little while the war and the world and all our worries felt very far away. We stayed on Miller's Point until full dark, talking and kissing and dreaming out loud about futures that seemed possible in the forgiving darkness. Sarah talked about maybe going to graduate school or traveling more or writing for a magazine. I talked about maybe trying to write something real, maybe applying to colleges, maybe seeing what else was out there beyond Millfield. "You should come with me," Sarah said suddenly. "When I leave for New York, you could see the city, experience something different. We could." "I can't," I said, even though part of me desperately wanted to. "My father needs me, and my mother with Tommy gone, I can't just leave." "For a week, Jack, not forever. Just come for a week, see what's out there." "Sarah." "Think about it," she said. "That's all I'm asking, just think about it." We drove back to Millfield in comfortable silence, her radio playing softly, the night air warm through the open windows. She dropped me at home just before 11, kissed me goodnight at the curb like we were characters in some innocent movie from the 50s, before the world got complicated. "Tomorrow?" she asked. "Tomorrow," I confirmed. "Come by the station after lunch. We could go to the library, or I could introduce you to Rosie properly, or—" "Surprise me," Sarah said, smiling. "Let's just see where the day takes us." I watched her drive away, then floated up the front walk like a man in a dream. My father was on the porch, sitting in his chair in the darkness, smoking his pipe. The ember glowed orange in the night. "Good evening," he asked. "Yeah, Dad, really good." He nodded slowly. "Your mother and I are going to bed. Don't stay up too late." "I won't." But I did stay up late, sitting in my room with my notebook, trying to capture the feeling of the evening, the sunset, the kiss, the way Sarah's hand felt in mine, the impossible possibility that life could be something more than what I'd always thought it would be. I wrote until after 1 in the morning, and when I finally fell asleep, I dreamed of flying, not in planes like my father had wanted, but just flying, soaring over fields and towns and mountains, free and unbound and full of joy. I didn't know that it would be my last peaceful night for a long time. I didn't know that the next morning everything would shatter. The knock came at 7:15, before I'd even left for the station. I was in the kitchen, eating toast and reading yesterday's newspaper, when I heard it, 3 sharp raps on the front door, official and urgent. My mother was upstairs making the beds. My father had already left to open the station. I got up to answer it, annoyed at whoever was calling so early, probably some salesman or... I opened the door and stopped breathing. 2 men in army uniforms stood on our porch, officers. Their faces were professionally sympathetic, carefully neutral, and I knew before they said a word why they were there. "Is this the Miller residence?" the taller one asked. "Yes," I whispered. "Is Mrs. Grace Miller home?" I couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't think. The morning sun was shining, birds were singing, the world was continuing on exactly as it had been, but everything had stopped. Everything had ended. "Son," the officer said, his voice gentle, "is your mother home?" "Jack," my mother's voice came from behind me. "Who is it?" She appeared at my shoulder, and I heard her make a sound, not quite a gasp, not quite a moan, something wordless and animal and full of understanding. "Mrs. Miller," the officer said, "may we come in?" What happened next exists in my memory like photographs, disconnected images, frozen moments that don't quite add up to a coherent narrative. My mother sinking into a chair. The officers' mouths moving, words I couldn't quite hear over the roaring in my ears. Someone calling my father at the station. My mother's face, white as paper, her hands clutching the telegram they'd given her. The words I finally registered: "Killed in action, June 12th, Quang Tri Province, deepest sympathies, arrangements." June 12th. 4 days ago. Tommy had been dead for 4 days, and we'd been going about our lives, eating dinner and working at the station, and me kissing a girl on Miller's Point while my brother was already gone, already just a memory, already nothing but a name that would go on a wall somewhere, a flag in a box, a telegram delivered at 7:15 on a Wednesday morning. My father arrived 20 minutes later, still in his work clothes, and I'd never seen him move so slowly. He came through the door and saw my mother in her chair and the officers standing awkwardly in our living room, and he aged 30 years in an instant. "Grace," he said, and his voice broke on her name. "He's gone, John," my mother whispered. "Our boy is gone." My father lowered himself into the chair beside her, took her hand, and made no sound at all. But his shoulders shook, and I realized I was watching my father cry for the first time in my life. I stood there in the doorway, 17 years old, and felt my whole world collapse into ashes. Tommy was dead. My brother was dead. And nothing would ever be the same again. The rest of that day exists in fragments, like a mirror someone dropped, pieces of memory scattered across time, sharp-edged and incomplete. I remember the officers leaving, their polished shoes clicking on our porch steps, their car pulling away with careful, respectful slowness. I remember neighbors starting to arrive, word traveled fast in Millfield, faster than seemed possible, carrying casseroles and pies and words that meant nothing. Mrs. Patterson with her tuna noodle dish, the Reverend Matthews with his Bible and his gentle, useless platitudes, Mrs. Henderson from the Five and Dime with a plate of cookies nobody would eat. I remember my father sitting in his chair, staring at nothing, still in his work clothes, his hands limp in his lap. My mother in the kitchen, mechanically accepting food from neighbors, stacking containers in the refrigerator with precise, careful movements, as if keeping her hands busy could keep her mind from breaking. I remember calling the station to say we wouldn't be in today, old man Peterson answering, his voice going soft when I told him why. "Oh, Jack," he'd said, "oh, son, I'm so sorry." And I remember, sometime around noon, Sarah's white Impala pulling up in front of our house. She got out slowly, hesitantly, as if approaching a house of grief required a different kind of movement. She carried a small paper bag and wore a simple blue dress, her hair pulled back, her face uncertain. She stopped at the edge of our lawn when she saw me sitting on the porch steps where I'd been since the neighbors started arriving, unable to be inside with their sympathy and their casseroles and their eyes full of pity. "Jack," she said softly, and the way she said my name made my throat close up. I couldn't speak. If I tried to speak, I would fall apart, and I couldn't fall apart. Not yet, not where people could see. Sarah climbed the porch steps and sat down beside me. She didn't touch me, didn't try to hug me or comfort me or say any of the useless things everyone else had been saying. She just sat there, and after a moment she opened the paper bag and pulled out 2 glazed donuts from the bakery near her motel. "I brought these," she said. I don't know what I thought. It seemed important this morning to bring them, but now I'm here and it seems stupid. I'm sorry, I don't know what to do." Her honesty broke through something in me. Everyone else had known exactly what to do, what to say, how to perform grief and sympathy. But Sarah admitted she didn't know, and somehow that was more real, more true than all the practiced condolences. "He's dead," I said, and saying it out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. "Tommy's dead. He died 4 days ago in some place I can't even pronounce, and I didn't feel it. Shouldn't I have felt it? If your brother dies, shouldn't you feel it somehow, even halfway around the world?" "I don't know," Sarah said. Maybe that's just something people say to make death seem less random, less meaningless, like there's some cosmic connection that would warn us, but I think," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "I think maybe the truth is that people die and the world keeps turning and we don't feel it until someone knocks on the door and tells us, and that's the cruelest part, that life just goes on until it suddenly doesn't." I turned to look at her, this girl I'd known for barely 2 days, and wondered how she could understand so completely. "I kissed you," I said. "Last night, on Miller's Point, I kissed you and I was happy, really happy, and he was already dead. I was happy while he was dead." "Jack, what kind of person does that make me?" "Human," Sarah said firmly. "It makes you human. You didn't know. You're allowed to have been happy. Being sad now doesn't mean you should have been sad then." Inside the house, I could hear my mother crying, finally great wrenching sobs that came from somewhere deep and primal. My father's voice, low and steady, trying to comfort her. The sound of it made my chest ache. "I should go in," I said. "I should be with them." "Do you want to go in?" The question surprised me with its directness. Did I want to? No, I wanted to run. I wanted to get in Sarah's car and drive away from Millfield and grief and telegrams and the empty chair at our dinner table. I wanted to rewind time to yesterday, to last week, to March when Tommy left and I could have said something different, something better than calling him an idiot and punching his shoulder. "No," I admitted, "but I should." "Those aren't the same thing," Sarah said. "Wanting to and should, you don't have to carry everything right now, Jack. You're allowed to sit here. You're allowed to not know what to do." So I sat there and Sarah sat beside me, and we didn't eat the donuts and we didn't talk much. And when neighbors came up the walk, she'd answer their questions quietly. Yes, it was the Miller house. Yes, the family was inside. Yes, they appreciated the kindness, so I didn't have to. Sometime in the afternoon, she went to her car and came back with a notebook and a pen. She handed them to me. "Write," she said simply, "not for anyone else, not something polished or pretty, just write what you're feeling, all of it, even the ugly parts, especially the ugly parts. Get it out of your head and onto paper where you can see it." "I can't." "You can," she said, "trust me, write." So I wrote, sitting on the porch steps of my childhood home with my brother dead and my parents destroyed and my future collapsed. I wrote. I wrote about the knock on the door, about the officers' faces, about my mother's sound when she understood, about my father crying, about rage and guilt and the unfairness of it all, about how Tommy had always been the better one, the braver one, and how the world had gotten it wrong taking him instead of me. I wrote until my hand cramped and tears were dropping onto the page, making the ink run. I wrote until I had nothing left inside me except emptiness. Sarah read what I'd written. I handed her the pages without thinking, some instinct telling me she needed to see that bearing witness was important somehow. She read slowly, and when she finished, she set the notebook down and wrapped her arms around me, and I let myself break. I cried into her shoulder like a child, great heaving sobs that came from somewhere I didn't know existed. I cried for Tommy, for my parents, for myself. I cried for all the things we'd never do together, all the conversations we'd never have, all the years stolen away. I cried for the brother who defended me on the playground and taught me to throw a curveball and left me alone to figure out how to be a man without him. Sarah held me and didn't say anything because there was nothing to say. Some pain is too big for words. Some losses can't be fixed with platitudes about God's plan or how he died doing what he believed in or how we should be proud. Proud, like pride could fill the hole where my brother used to be. When I finally pulled back, my face wet and my eyes burning, Sarah gently wiped my cheeks with her hand. "I'm sorry," I said, "I shouldn't have." "Stop apologizing for feeling things," she said. "You're allowed to fall apart, the world just ended, act like it." "The world didn't end, that's the problem. It should have ended, but look." I gestured at the street where cars drove past, where old Mr. Crawford was mowing his lawn like it was any other Wednesday, where children played tag in the Petersons' yard. "Everything just keeps going. How does everything just keep going?" "Because it has to," Sarah said. "Because if it stopped every time someone died, the whole world would be frozen. But that doesn't mean you have to keep going, not right now. You're allowed to stop. You're allowed to sit here and be broken. Tomorrow or next week or next month you can start moving again, but not today. Today you can just be." We sat in silence as the afternoon stretched into evening. Neighbors came and went. My father came out once, looked at me and Sarah, nodded at her in acknowledgement or thanks or both, and went back inside. The sun started its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky those same beautiful colors it had painted the night before, indifferent to human suffering. "I was supposed to take you to the library today," I said eventually, my voice hoarse from crying. "Show you around town properly." "We have time," Sarah said. "Do we? You were leaving New York, remember? Your grand adventure." She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was careful. "New York will wait. I'm not going anywhere, Jack, not right now, not unless you want me to." "I don't want you to," I said. "Is that selfish? Everything's falling apart and I'm asking you to stay and watch it happen." "It's not selfish, it's human." She took my hand, laced her fingers through mine the way she had on Miller's Point. "I want to stay. I want to help if I can, even if helping just means sitting here and being another person who cares." "You barely know me." "I know you enough," she said. "I know you're kind and talented and that you loved your brother. I know you're hurting in ways I can't fix, but I can be here. That counts for something, doesn't it?" It counted for everything. As the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, Sarah finally stood up, stretching stiff muscles. "I should go," she said. "Let you be with your family, but I'll come back tomorrow if that's okay. Bring coffee and those terrible donuts and just be here." "Okay," I said. "Sarah." She turned back. "Thank you for today, for not saying all the things everyone else says, for just being real." She smiled, sad but genuine. "Real is the only thing I know how to be." I watched her drive away, her taillights disappearing into the dusk, and then I went inside to my family and our grief. The next days passed in a blur of arrangements and decisions and details that seemed simultaneously crucial and completely meaningless. The funeral home, the casket selection, the church service, the cemetery plot, the flag presentation, the military honors, all the machinery of death and remembrance grinding forward, transforming my brother from a person into a ceremony. They told us his body would arrive in 5 days. There would be a wake, then a funeral, then a burial with full military honors. The American Legion was organizing an honor guard. The VFW was providing the flag. Reverend Matthews would officiate. It was all very proper, very respectful, very much like dozens of other funerals happening across the country as boys came home from Vietnam in boxes draped with flags. My mother threw herself into the planning with a manic energy that scared me. She picked out flowers and music and Bible verses, as if getting these details exactly right could somehow change what had happened, could bring him back, could make sense of the senseless. My father helped her, moving through the tasks mechanically, and at night I could hear them crying in their bedroom, the sound carrying through the walls of our small house. I couldn't cry anymore. After that first day on the porch with Sarah, I seemed to have run out of tears. I felt hollowed out, empty, moving through the world like a ghost haunting his own life. But Sarah came every day like she'd promised. She brought coffee and donuts that first morning, and when my mother saw her, something in my mother's face softened. Maybe she recognized another woman trying to help in the only way she knew how. Maybe she just needed someone new, someone who hadn't known Tommy, someone who wouldn't cry and tell stories about what a good boy he'd been. "You must be Sarah," my mother said, accepting the coffee with shaking hands. "Jack mentioned you." "Yes, ma'am, I'm so sorry for your loss. I didn't know Tommy, but Jack's told me about him. He sounds like he was wonderful." "He was," my mother said, and her voice broke on the words. Then, to my surprise, she asked, "Would you like to see pictures?" I was just putting together some photos for the service. So Sarah sat with my mother at the kitchen table, looking through photo albums and shoeboxes full of memories. Tommy as a baby, chubby and laughing. Tommy on his first day of school, gap-toothed and proud. Tommy and me at the lake, sunburned and happy. Tommy in his baseball uniform at his 8th grade graduation at junior prom with Jenny Morrison in her pink dress. Tommy in his army uniform, so young and so certain. I couldn't watch. I left them there and went to my room, pulled out my notebooks and tried to write. But the words wouldn't come. Every time I put pen to paper, all I could see was Tommy's face. All I could hear was my mother's voice saying, "Our boy is gone." All I could feel was the weight of absence. Sarah found me there an hour later, sitting at my desk with a blank page in front of me. "Your mom's resting," she said softly, standing in my doorway. "Can I come in?" I nodded and she stepped into my room, my small, cluttered room with its model airplanes hanging from the ceiling. Tommy had helped me build them. And its bookshelves full of paperbacks and its walls covered with maps. Tommy had given me most of them, marking places he wanted to visit someday. Everything was Tommy. Even here, even in my own space, my brother was everywhere. Sarah sat on the edge of my bed, looking around with gentle curiosity. "Your mom showed me the photos," she said. "He looked like you, same eyes." "He was better than me," I said flatly. "Braver, kinder, better." "Jack, it's true, everyone knows it. I'm just the kid brother, the one who stayed home and pumped gas while he went off to be a hero. And now he's dead and I'm alive, and it's not fair. It should have been." "Don't," Sarah said sharply with more force than I'd heard from her before. "Don't you dare finish that sentence. Don't you dare wish yourself dead because your brother died. That doesn't honor him, that doesn't help anyone." "Then what does?" I asked, and I heard the anger in my voice, the rage that had been building underneath the numbness. "What helps, what honors him, putting him in the ground with a flag, having some general I've never met write a letter about his sacrifice, watching my mother cry herself to sleep every night? Tell me, Sarah, tell me what the point of any of this is." She was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was measured, careful. "I don't know if there is a point," she said. "I don't know if there's supposed to be. Sometimes terrible things happen and there's no lesson, no silver lining, no greater purpose. Sometimes people just die and it's awful and wrong and there's nothing we can do except survive it. That's it, just survive. For now, yes, that's it. You survive this day and then you survive tomorrow, and eventually surviving gets a little easier, and then one day you realize you're not just surviving anymore. You're living again, different than before, changed by what happened, but living." "And Tommy?" "You carry him with you," Sarah said simply. "In your memories, in your writing, in the way you choose to live your life. He doesn't disappear just because he's gone. He becomes part of who you are." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that this pain would eventually become bearable, that life would feel like life again someday. But sitting in my room, surrounded by reminders of my brother, unable to write or cry or do anything except exist in this horrible present moment, I couldn't imagine it. Sarah stood up and came over to my desk. She looked at the blank page, then at me. "Can I tell you something my English professor told me once?" she said, "when I was stuck on a paper, frozen by trying to make it perfect." I nodded. She said, "You can't edit a blank page. Give yourself permission to write badly. Just write something, anything, and you can make it better later, but you can't fix nothing." She picked up my pen and handed it to me. "Write badly, Jack. Write messy and angry and unfair. Write all the things you can't say out loud. Don't worry about making it good, just write it true." Then she kissed the top of my head, a gesture so tender and unexpected it made my chest ache, and left me alone with my notebook and my pen and my grief. And slowly, painfully, I began to write. Not about Tommy dying, not about the war or injustice or any of the big things. Instead, I wrote about small moments. About Tommy teaching me to ride a bike, running alongside me with his hand on my seat, promising he wouldn't let go and then letting go anyway so I could learn to balance on my own. About the time we built a fort in the woods behind our house and spent an entire summer pretending to be soldiers, before we knew what soldiers actually did, when war was still just a game we played. I wrote about his laugh, about how he snorted when he found something really funny, about how he always let me have the last cookie, even though I knew he wanted it, about the time he got in a fight with Bobby Mitchell because Bobby called me a runt and came home with a black eye and a grin, saying, "You should see the other guy." I wrote about ordinary things, unremarkable things, all the moments that make up a life and a brotherhood. And in writing them, in preserving them on paper, they became something more than memories. They became Tommy's legacy, more real and lasting than any flag or telegram or marble headstone. I wrote until my hand ached and the light faded from my window. I wrote until I heard my father come home from the station and my mother moving around in the kitchen starting dinner. I wrote until the words finally ran out, and when I set down my pen, I felt something I hadn't felt since the knock on the door. Not peace, not acceptance, but a small sense of purpose. Tommy was gone, but the stories of who he'd been, those could survive, those I could preserve. And maybe that was something. Maybe that was enough to keep going. The casket arrived on Saturday morning, 5 days after the telegram, delivered to Morrison's funeral home in a grey army transport vehicle. My father and I went to view the body first, before my mother, because Mr. Morrison said it would be better that way to prepare ourselves, to make sure my mother wouldn't face anything too shocking. The funeral home was on Maple Street, a Victorian house painted pale blue with white trim, converted into a business sometime in the 20s. Inside, it smelled like flowers and furniture polish and something else, something chemical and sweet that I would forever after associate with death. Mr. Morrison, a thin man with gentle hands and a voice like soft fabric, led us to the viewing room. The casket sat at the far end, mahogany and brass closed, an American flag draped over it, perfectly folded and positioned. Flowers surrounded it, sent by people we knew and people we'd never met, all of them expressing sympathy in the language of carnations and lilies and roses. "Are you ready?" Mr. Morrison asked, his hand on my father's arm. My father nodded, though I could see his jaw clenched tight, working like he was chewing something bitter. Mr. Morrison opened the casket. The boy inside looked like Tommy and didn't look like Tommy at the same time. They dressed him in his uniform, pressed and perfect, his hair combed neatly, his face waxen and still. His hands were folded across his chest, and I could see where the mortician had worked to make him presentable, to hide whatever damage had been done 9,000 miles away in a place whose name I still couldn't pronounce correctly. My father made a sound, not quite a sob, not quite a gasp, and reached out to touch Tommy's face. His hand trembled as it made contact with the cold, unyielding flesh that had once been warm, once been alive, once been his son. "That's him," my father said, his voice breaking. "That's my boy." I couldn't speak, couldn't move. This thing in the casket, this carefully arranged corpse, this wasn't Tommy. Tommy was motion and laughter and life. Tommy was throwing a baseball and teasing me about girls and eating 3 helpings at dinner. Tommy was warm hugs and hard punches on the shoulder and a voice calling my name from down the hall. This was just a shell, just a body, just evidence of absence. "Jack," my father turned to look at me, his face streaked with tears. "Do you want to say goodbye?" Did I? How do you say goodbye to someone who's already gone? How do you address a corpse and pretend it's the person you loved? But I stepped forward anyway, because my father needed me to, because it was expected, because there was nowhere else to go but forward into this nightmare. I looked down at my brother's face, peaceful, they would say later. He looked so peaceful and wanted to scream. There was nothing peaceful about this, nothing right or fair or acceptable. "I'm sorry," I whispered, not knowing what I was apologizing for being alive, for not saving him, for every time I'd been annoyed with him or fought with him or taken him for granted. "I'm so sorry, Tommy." His body offered no response, no absolution, no comfort. The dead don't speak. They just lie there and let the living project their guilt and grief onto them like blank screens. My father and I stood there for a long time, the 3 Miller men together for the last time. Then Mr. Morrison gently suggested we take my mother home and bring her back later, when she was ready. My father nodded numbly, and we left Tommy alone in that room full of flowers and silence. We brought my mother that afternoon. She was dressed in black. She'd spent the previous evening altering an old dress, taking it in at the waist where she'd lost weight this past year, worrying about Tommy, though none of us had noticed until now. Her hands shook as my father helped her from the car, and her face was pale, drawn tight with the effort of holding herself together. Sarah was waiting outside the funeral home. She'd come every day that week, sometimes staying for hours, sometimes just checking in. She'd helped my mother with the funeral arrangements, called distant relatives, organized food donations from neighbors. She'd become part of our grief, woven into this terrible chapter of our lives, and I was grateful for her presence in a way I couldn't articulate. "Would you like me to come with you?" she asked my mother quietly. My mother nodded, reaching for Sarah's hand like a lifeline. So we went in together, my mother, my father, Sarah, and me. A strange procession, half family, half assembled by circumstance. But grief doesn't follow normal rules about who belongs where. It takes all comers. When my mother saw the casket, she stopped walking, just froze in the doorway, her whole body rigid, as if moving forward would make it real in a way it hadn't been before. "I can't," she whispered. "I can't, John, I can't see him like that." "You can," my father said, his arm around her shoulders. "You're the strongest person I know, Grace. You can do this." "He's my baby," she said, and her voice cracked wide open. "He's my baby boy and he's supposed to outlive me. Children are supposed to outlive their parents. That's how it's supposed to work." "I know," my father said. "I know, sweetheart." They stood there locked together while Sarah and I waited. And then, gathering herself with visible effort, my mother walked forward to say goodbye to her firstborn son. The sound she made when she saw him, I'll hear it for the rest of my life. It was the sound of a heart breaking, of every hope and dream and prayer shattering at once. She collapsed against the casket, her hands on Tommy's face, his chest, his hands, touching him like she could bring him back through sheer force of will. "My boy," she sobbed. "My beautiful boy, come back, please come back, please, Tommy, please." My father held her as she broke, and I turned away because I couldn't watch, couldn't witness this raw display of maternal grief without coming apart myself. Sarah's hand found mine, squeezed tight, and together we stood there while my mother said goodbye to half her heart. The wake was Sunday evening. They opened the funeral home to visitors from 5 to 8, and people came, so many people I hadn't realized Tommy had touched. His friends from high school, grown now and some already married. His baseball coach, Mr. Turner, who cried openly and told stories about Tommy's legendary home run in the county championship. Teachers who remembered him as a good student, polite and hardworking. Customers from the gas station who'd watched him grow up. Veterans from the American Legion, men who'd fought in wars that were supposed to have ended all wars, who stood in their dress uniforms and saw in Tommy's casket their own younger selves, their friends who hadn't come home. Jenny Morrison came, Tommy's girlfriend from junior year, now engaged to Bob Tucker like I'd mentioned to Tommy in one of my letters. She stood by the casket for a long time, crying silently, and when she left, she hugged me hard and said, "He was one of the good ones, Jack, he really was." The funeral home grew warm with all the bodies, the air thick with the smell of flowers and perfume and grief. People formed a line to pay their respects, moving slowly past the casket, some pausing to pray, some just standing in silence, all of them uncomfortable with death the way Americans always are, wanting to acknowledge it but not look too closely, wanting to honor the fallen but not think too hard about why he'd fallen. Sarah stayed by my side the entire evening, a quiet presence. She dressed in a simple black dress, her hair pulled back, and she moved through the crowd with a grace that made people naturally open up to her. She listened to stories about Tommy, offered comfort to my parents, fetched water and tissues, and provided the kind of practical support that doesn't feel like help but makes everything bearable. Around 7, a group of protesters showed up outside. Not many, maybe 15 or 20, mostly college kids from Indianapolis or Bloomington, young people with long hair and handmade signs that read "Bring them home," and how many more. They weren't loud or aggressive, just standing on the sidewalk across from the funeral home, holding their signs in silent witness. The veterans from the American Legion saw them and bristled. I watched as Commander Peterson, Old Man Peterson's son, who'd lost an arm in Korea, started toward the door, his face red with anger. "Goddamn hippies," he muttered. "No respect, not even for a funeral." My father intercepted him, put a hand on his chest. "Leave it, Bill, they're not hurting anyone." "They're disrespecting Tommy's memory," Peterson said, "standing out there with their signs while we're trying to mourn." "They're exercising the rights Tommy died defending," my father said quietly. "That's what we tell ourselves, isn't it, that our boys died for freedom? Well, this is what freedom looks like." Peterson looked like he wanted to argue, but something in my father's face stopped him. He nodded stiffly and went back inside, muttering under his breath. I slipped out the side door, needing air, needing space from all those people and their grief and their stories about my brother. Sarah followed me without asking, understanding that sometimes presence matters more than questions. We stood in the small garden behind the funeral home, where they kept a bench and some rose bushes for grieving families who needed a moment away. The evening was warm, the sky turning pink and gold with sunset, birds singing their evening songs like the world was still normal, still fine. "Those protesters," I said, watching them through the fence, "do you think they're right?" Sarah took her time answering. "I think they're young people who don't want any more brothers dying. I think that's right, but I also think," she paused, "I think standing outside a funeral home might not be the most effective way to make that point." "My father defended them." "Your father's a good man." "He is," I agreed, "but he's also a man who sent his own son to war, who raised Tommy to believe serving your country was the highest calling. And now Tommy's dead and he has to live with that, with the choice he made, the values he taught. How do you reconcile that?" "I don't think you do," Sarah said softly. "I think you just carry it like everything else." One of the protesters, a girl not much older than Sarah with long braided hair and a peace sign on her shirt, noticed us watching. She said something to the others and they began to leave, picking up their signs, moving down the street. Before she left, the girl looked at me and I saw in her eyes something unexpected: compassion. She wasn't protesting my brother, she was protesting the war that killed him. She was trying, in her own way, to make sure no more families got telegrams, no more mothers collapsed at caskets, no more 17-year-old boys lost their brothers. Tommy would have hated her politics, but he would have respected her conviction. "I don't know what I believe anymore," I said to Sarah. "About the war, about duty, about any of it. A week ago I knew, or I thought I knew, but now." "Now you get to figure it out for yourself," Sarah said. "Not what your father believes, not what Tommy believed, not what Millfield expects. What you believe, that's your right, Jack, and it's also your responsibility." Inside, through the windows, I could see people still gathered around the casket, still paying their respects. My mother stood beside my father, leaning into him, and even from here I could see how small she looked, how diminished. In 1 week she'd aged a decade. "I should go back in," I said. "Yes," Sarah agreed, "but you can take 5 more minutes. The dead aren't going anywhere, and sometimes the living need a moment to breathe." So we stood there in the garden, watching the sky turn from pink to purple to deep blue, and I let myself breathe, let myself exist outside the performance of grief for just a few more moments. Then we went back inside to finish the wake, to accept more condolences, to hear more stories about what a good boy Tommy had been, what a hero he was, how proud we should be. Proud, that word again. I smiled and nodded and thanked people for coming, and inside I felt nothing but hollow. The funeral was Monday morning at 11. The whole town seemed to turn out. The church was packed, people standing in the back and along the sides when the pews filled up. Reverend Matthews gave a eulogy about sacrifice and service and the price of freedom. He read from the Bible about there being no greater love than laying down your life for your friends. He talked about Tommy like he'd known him well, though I could count on one hand the number of times they'd actually spoken. But that's what funerals are, I suppose: performance, theater, a way for the living to make sense of death by wrapping it in ceremony and scripture and familiar rituals. My mother cried through the entire service. My father sat stone-faced beside her, his arm around her shoulders, his jaw tight. I sat on my mother's other side, Sarah behind me in the family section, and I felt like I was watching the funeral from somewhere outside my body, like I was floating above it all, observing but not participating, present but not really there. They sang hymns Tommy had never particularly cared for. They prayed prayers Tommy had never believed in. He'd gone to church because it was expected, but he told me once that he didn't think God paid much attention to Indiana, much less to individual boys playing baseball and dreaming about the future. After the service, we processed to the cemetery. The casket led the way in the hearse, followed by our car, followed by what seemed like half of Millfield. The cemetery was old, dating back to the 1840s, full of Millers and Hendersons and Petersons and all the other founding families. Tommy would be buried in the family plot, next to the space reserved for my parents, next to the space that would someday, presumably, be mine. The thought made me feel claustrophobic. Even in death, we were expected to stay put, to remain in Millfield, to never venture far from home. At the graveside, the honor guard performed their ritual with precision: the folding of the flag, the presentation to my mother, the rifle salute that made her flinch. Taps played, that mournful melody that has echoed over soldiers' grave for more than a century, and I watched my mother clutch the folded flag to her chest like it could somehow substitute for the son she'd lost. "On behalf of the President of the United States Army, and a grateful nation," the officer said, his voice formal and practiced, "please accept this flag as a symbol of our appreciation for your loved one's honorable and faithful service." A grateful nation, honorable service. The words rang hollow, empty of meaning. Tommy wasn't a symbol or a concept. He was a person, my brother, and he was gone, and no amount of ceremony or honor or folded flags could change that. People came to our house after, bringing more food. offering more condolences, filling our home with noise and bodies and the overwhelming weight of communal grief. I escaped to my room as soon as I could, pulling Sarah with me, needing to be away from all those people who meant well but whose presence felt suffocating. We sat on my bed, proper, careful not to be too close, aware that my parents were downstairs and this was 1969 and certain proprieties still mattered, even in grief, and didn't speak for a long time. Finally, Sarah broke the silence. "What happens now?" she asked. "I don't know," I said. "We go back to normal, I guess, except there is no normal anymore. There's just this after." "What do you want to happen?" I looked at her, this girl who'd arrived in my life a week ago and somehow become essential to it. This girl who'd sat through my brother's funeral even though she'd never met him. This girl who'd promised to drive to New York and instead had stayed in Millfield, Indiana, watching a family fall apart. "I want to leave," I said, the words surprising me even as I spoke them. "I want to get out of this town, out of this house, out of this grief. I want to go somewhere Tommy never went, see things he never saw, become someone he never knew. Is that awful? Is that betraying him?" "No," Sarah said firmly. "It's living. It's choosing life instead of becoming a monument to death. Tommy wouldn't want you to stay here and be sad forever, Jack. He'd want you to live." "How do you know? You never met him." "Because I know you," she said. "And you loved him, which means he loved you. And people who love each other want each other to be happy even when they're gone, especially when they're gone." I thought about her offer from Miller's Point, made in what felt like another lifetime, in the before times when Tommy was still alive even though we didn't know it. "You asked me to come with you," I said. "To New York, did you mean it?" Sarah's eyes widened slightly. "Jack. Because I want to see what's out there, want to write something that matters, want to be more than the kid who pumped gas while his brother became a hero. I struggled to articulate the feeling. I want to prove that his death meant something by living a life that matters. Does that make sense?" "It makes perfect sense," Sarah said, "but Jack, your parents will survive without me. They did before I was born, they will after I'm gone." "You're 17. I'll be 18 in September, old enough to enlist if I wanted, old enough to die for my country, but apparently not old enough to leave home and see what else is out there." Sarah took both my hands in hers. "I'm not saying don't do it, I'm saying think about it, really think about it. This is grief talking maybe, and grief makes us want to run, want to do something, anything to make the pain stop, but running doesn't make pain stop, it just changes the scenery." "What if it's not just grief?" I asked. "What if it's also truth? What if Tommy dying showed me that life is short and unpredictable, and if you don't chase what you want, you might never get the chance?" She didn't answer right away, just looked at me with those root beer eyes, seeing me in a way I wasn't sure I was ready to be seen. "Then talk to your parents," she said finally. "Tell them what you're feeling, give them a chance to understand, you owe them that much." She was right, of course, but the thought of telling my parents I wanted to leave, especially now, especially with Tommy barely in the ground, felt impossible. Still, I nodded. "Okay, I'll talk to them, but Sarah, whatever happens, whatever they say, thank you for staying, for everything. You didn't have to and you did, and that means more than I can say." "Where else would I be?" she said simply, and then she kissed me soft and sad and sweet, and for a moment in that kiss I felt something other than grief. I felt hope. And maybe that was enough to start building a future on. Maybe. I waited 3 days before talking to my parents. 3 days of watching my mother move through the house like a ghost, touching Tommy's things, his baseball glove on the hall table, his jacket still hanging by the door, his coffee mug in the cabinet that she'd take out and hold and then put back without using. 3 days of watching my father work longer hours at the station, coming home exhausted and hollow-eyed, burying himself in ledgers and oil changes rather than facing the empty space at our dinner table. 3 days of Sarah coming by each afternoon, helping my mother with small tasks, sitting with me in the garden or on the porch, not pushing but making her presence known. She'd extended her stay at the Sleepy Time Motor Lodge indefinitely, calling her parents to explain. I could hear her through the phone booth glass when she made the call, her voice patient as she answered their questions and concerns. "No, Mom, I'm not in danger. Yes, I know New York is waiting, because someone here needs me and that matters more right now. I don't know how long. Mom, I'm 21 years old. I'm allowed to change my plans." On the third evening after the funeral, a Wednesday, my father came home from the station at 6 like always. My mother had made pot roast. She'd been cooking again, methodically preparing meals none of us had much appetite for, but the routine seemed to anchor her somehow. We sat down to dinner, the three of us at our table that had always held four, and tried to pretend the absence wasn't screaming at us. "How was the station today?" my mother asked, the question automatic ritual. "Busy," my father said. "The Peterson boy brought in his Ford, transmission trouble. I told him it would cost more to fix than the car's worth, but he wants to try anyway. That's nice, dear. Silence fell, heavy and uncomfortable. The clink of silverware on plates, the ticking of the kitchen clock. Outside, a dog barked and someone's lawn mower buzzed in the distance. Normal sounds, life continuing. I need to talk to you both about something, I said, the words coming out before I could lose my nerve. They both looked up at me, and I saw the fear flash across my mother's face. What now? What else could possibly go wrong? Nothing's wrong, I said quickly. I need to tell you what I'm thinking about the future, about my plans. My father set down his fork carefully. My mother's hand went to her throat, a nervous gesture I'd seen a lot lately. Go on, my father said. I took a deep breath. I want to leave Millfield, not forever maybe, but for a while. I want to see what else is out there, maybe try to write, maybe go to college eventually. I struggled to find the right words. I want to live, Dad, really live, not just exist, not just work at the station because it's expected. I want more than that. The silence that followed felt eternal. My mother spoke first, her voice thin and strained. You want to leave us now, after everything. Not to hurt you, Mom, never that. But staying here, staying in Tommy's shadow, living the life he can't live anymore, that's not honoring him, that's just existing, and I don't think that's what he'd want for me. What do you know about what your brother would want? My mother's voice rose, sharp with pain and anger. You're here, you're alive, he's dead, and you want to leave us. You want to abandon us when we've already lost one son. Grace, my father started, but she cut him off. No, John, he needs to hear this. We need him. The station needs him. This family needs him. He can't just run off chasing some pipe dream about writing or college or whatever it is. He has responsibilities. He has a place here. A place Tommy was supposed to fill, I said quietly. I'm not Tommy, Mom. I can't be him. I can't replace him. Nobody's asking you to replace him. Tears streamed down her face now. But we're asking you to stay, to be here, to be our son. Is that so much? Is that too much to ask? I looked at my father, hoping for support, for understanding. He was staring at his plate, his jaw working, his hands clenched into fists on either side of his dinner. Dad, I prompted, what do you think? He was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and measured, but I could hear the effort it took to keep it controlled. When I came back from my war, World War II, I had dreams too, things I wanted to do, places I wanted to see, but my father needed me at the station. My mother needed me at home, and I did what was expected because that's what you did. That's what family meant. You sacrificed what you wanted for what was needed. And are you happy? I asked. Did sacrificing your dreams make you happy? His head snapped up, his eyes meeting mine, and I saw anger there, real anger, sharp and hot. Happy, he repeated. What does happy have to do with anything? I did my duty. I took care of my family. I built a life. That's what men do, Jack. We don't chase happiness like it's some butterfly we can catch. We do what needs to be done. Even if it kills us inside. Even then, he stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the linoleum. Your brother understood duty. He understood sacrifice. He gave everything for this country, for the values we believe in. And you want to spit on that by running away to chase some fantasy about being a writer. I'm not spitting on anything, I said, standing too, my own anger rising to meet his. I'm trying to live the life he can't. I'm trying to make something of myself, to see the world, to do something that matters. Writing matters, Dad, stories matter, truth matters. You know what matters? My father said, his voice rising. Family matters, responsibility matters, being here for your mother when she's broken matters, working an honest job and contributing to this community matters. That's real life, Jack, not whatever romantic notion you've gotten in your head about being some kind of artist. Maybe I don't want real life, the words exploded out of me. Maybe I don't want your life working at a gas station until I'm old and tired and full of regrets about all the things I never did. Maybe I want something different, something more. Is that so wrong? Boys, my mother said weakly, but neither of us heard her. You think my life is worthless, my father said, his face flushed. You think the work I do, the family I've raised, the station I've kept running for 30 years, you think that doesn't matter. That's not what I said. It's what you meant. You look at me and see failure, see wasted potential. But I look at you and see a spoiled boy who doesn't understand what sacrifice means, what duty means, what family means. You think the world owes you something. You think your dreams are more important than anyone else's needs. That's not how life works, son. Maybe that's exactly how life should work, I shot back. Maybe if more people chased their dreams instead of sacrificing them for duty and responsibility, the world would be a better place. Maybe we wouldn't be sending boys to die in jungles for reasons nobody can explain. Maybe. Don't you dare, my father's voice dropped to something dangerous, quiet. Don't you dare use your brother's death to justify your selfishness. Tommy died serving his country. He died doing something noble and brave, and you want to dishonor that by running away. I'm not running away, I'm running toward something, toward a future, toward possibility, toward a girl you barely know, my father said flatly. That's what this is really about, isn't it, Sarah? This California girl who's filled your head with ideas about leaving, about being more than what you are. She'll be gone in a week, Jack, back to her life, her world. And you'll be here, or you'll be wherever she talked you into going, and you'll be alone. Is that what you want? The words hit harder than I expected, maybe because part of me feared he was right. What if Sarah did leave? What if I followed her and found myself lost and alone in a world I didn't understand? But another part of me, a stronger part, knew that wasn't the point. This wasn't just about Sarah. It was about me, about who I wanted to be, about refusing to let fear and duty and other people's expectations define my entire life. Maybe I will be alone, I said quietly. Maybe I'll fail. Maybe I'll end up back here in a year, broke and embarrassed, and you can say I told you so. But at least I'll have tried, at least I'll know. I won't spend the rest of my life wondering what if. My father stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something in his face shift. The anger faded, replaced by something sadder, deeper, disappointment maybe, or recognition. You sound just like him, my father said finally, just like Tommy before he left, so sure, so certain that there was something more out there, something better, and look where that certainty got him. The comparison felt like a knife between my ribs. I wanted to be like Tommy in so many ways, but not that way, not dead at 18 in a war that made no sense. My mother had her face in her hands now, crying silently. My father stood there, looking suddenly old and tired, all the fight gone out of him. If you leave, he said slowly, you're on your own. I won't support this. I won't pay for it or enable it or pretend I think it's a good idea. You want to be a man, make your own choices, then you deal with the consequences. John, my mother started, but he shook his head. No, Grace, he needs to understand. Actions have consequences, choices matter. If he wants to throw away everything we've built, everything we've given him for some pipe dream, then he does it alone. He walked out of the kitchen, and a moment later I heard the front door slam. Through the window, I watched him get in his truck and drive away, probably to the station, to the one place that made sense to him. My mother looked up at me, her face ravaged by tears. How can you do this to us? She whispered. How can you even think about leaving when we've just lost Tommy? Aren't we enough? Isn't home enough? I wanted to explain that it wasn't about them, wasn't about Millfield, wasn't about rejection or judgment or finding them lacking. It was about me, about needing to discover who I was when I wasn't someone's son or brother or employee, about needing to test myself against the world to see what I was capable of. But looking at my mother's broken face, I couldn't find the words. How do you tell someone you love that loving them isn't enough to keep you there? I'm sorry, Mom, I said helplessly. I'm so sorry. I left her crying at the kitchen table and went upstairs to my room, closed the door, and sat on my bed feeling like I'd just detonated a bomb in my own life. There was a soft knock 20 minutes later. I expected my mother, but it was my father who pushed open the door. He looked calmer now, the anger burned out, leaving only exhaustion. Can I come in? He asked. I nodded and he sat in my desk chair, his large frame making it look small and fragile. For a while we didn't speak. The evening light slanted through my window, painting everything gold and amber. Outside I could hear children playing, someone calling their dog, the normal sounds of a summer evening in Millfield. I was wrong, my father said finally. Downstairs, some of what I said, I was angry and scared and I lashed out. That wasn't fair. I waited, not sure where he was going. Your life isn't worthless, I said quietly. I never meant to imply. He held up a hand. Let me finish, please. I nodded. When I said I gave up my dreams for duty, that was true, but it was also incomplete. The truth is I didn't just give them up, they changed, evolved. What I wanted at 20 wasn't what I wanted at 30 or 40. The station, your mother, you boys, you became my dream, not the dream I started with, but a good one, a real one, a life I'm proud of. He paused, rubbing his face with both hands. But that's my path, Jack, my story. It doesn't have to be yours. Tommy found his path even though it led somewhere terrible. And you need to find yours, even if it leads away from here, even if it breaks your mother's heart and mine, even if, his voice cracked, even if we lose you too. You won't lose me, I said. I'm not going to war, I'm just going to see what's out there. Maybe write, maybe learn, maybe figure out who I am, but I'll come back or at least stay in touch. You're my family, you're my home, that doesn't change just because I leave. Doesn't it? He looked at me with those sad, knowing eyes. Tommy said the same thing, that he'd come back, that we'd always be a family, but leaving changes you, son. The world changes you. You can't unsee what you see or unlearn what you learn. You'll come back different if you come back at all, and that's," he swallowed hard, "that's terrifying for a father, knowing you can't protect your children once they step out that door." I understood then what this was really about, not disapproval or anger or disappointment, fear, simple, profound fear of losing another son. "I'll be careful," I promised. "I'll write every week, call when I can. I'll make sure you always know where I am and that I'm okay." "Like Tommy did." The words hung between us, sharp and painful. "Yes," I said, "like Tommy did, right up until the end. And if something happens to me, at least you'll know I died doing what I chose, living the life I wanted. Not because I was conscripted or obligated or trapped, but because I chose it." My father nodded slowly. "And this girl, Sarah?" "She's part of it," I admitted, "but not all of it. Even if she left tomorrow, I'd still want to go, still need to go. She just helped me see what I already knew." "She seems like a good person," my father said. "Strong, smart, maybe too smart for small-town boys like us." He smiled faintly. "Your mother likes her, that counts for something." "She does." "Of course she does. Sarah helped her when she needed it most. Sat with her, listened to her stories about Tommy, made her feel less alone. That's not nothing, Jack. That's the kind of person you want in your life." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, and I felt something ease between us. Not agreement exactly, but understanding, acceptance maybe. "When would you leave?" my father asked. "I don't know, soon probably. Sarah needs to get to New York and I trailed off, unsure how to finish. "You need to start your life," my father completed, "before fear or obligation or grief traps you here." "Yeah." He stood up, came over to my bed, and did something he hadn't done since I was small. He hugged me. Really hugged me tight and fierce, and I felt him shaking slightly, felt the enormity of what this goodbye would mean. "You're braver than I ever was," he said into my shoulder. "Both my boys, braver than their old man. I'm proud of you, Jack. Even if I'm also terrified, even if I wish you'd stay, I'm proud." When he pulled back, his eyes were wet. "Take care of your mother," he said. "Before you go, she's not as strong as she pretends." "I will." "And Jack, write it all down. Everything you see, everything you learn. Maybe someday I'll get to read it. Maybe I'll understand why you had to leave." He left then, closing the door softly behind him, and I sat alone in my room feeling like I'd just crossed some invisible threshold. I was still 17, still in my childhood bedroom in Millfield, Indiana, but something fundamental had shifted. I was no longer just Jack Miller, the gas station kid, Tommy's brother. I was becoming someone else. Someone I didn't quite know yet. And for the first time since the telegram arrived, I felt something other than grief. I felt ready. I found Sarah at the Sleepy Time Motor Lodge the next morning. She was sitting outside her room number 7, with its faded blue door and air conditioning unit that rattled like it was dying, reading a paperback and drinking coffee from a styrofoam cup. She looked up when she heard my footsteps on the concrete walkway, and something in my face must have told her what I'd decided, because she smiled. "You told them," she said. "It wasn't a question." I told them. I sat down in the plastic chair next to hers. It didn't go well at first. My mom cried, my dad got angry, but then I told her about the conversation with my father, about his fear and his understanding, about his unexpected blessing. "He's a good man," Sarah said when I finished. "Scared but good, that counts for a lot." "My mother still won't talk to me. She locked herself in their bedroom last night. I heard her crying." "Give her time. Mothers take these things harder. You're her baby now, her only child left. The idea of you leaving," Sarah shook her head. "It's not about you, Jack. It's about her own fear, her own grief." "I know, but it doesn't make it easier." Sarah set down her book, On the Road by Jack Kerouac, I noticed, appropriate given her journey, and turned to face me fully. "So what's the plan? When do we leave?" I asked. "You still want me to come with you? After everything, after meeting my family, after seeing what a mess this all is?" "Especially after all that," Sarah said firmly. "Jack, I've been thinking about this, about us, about what we're doing, and I think maybe we found each other for a reason. Not in some mystical fate kind of way, but in a practical way. You need to get out of Millfield and see the world. I need someone to share this journey with, someone who understands that we're not just driving to New York, we're discovering America, discovering ourselves. We fit, you and me. We make sense, huh?" "I don't have much money," I warned her. "Maybe $200 saved up from working at the station. That's not going to last long." "I have money. My parents gave me enough for the whole trip, and I've barely spent any of it. We can figure out the rest as we go. You can find work in New York or wherever we end up. We'll make it work." Just like that, you're willing to take on a broke 17-year-old as a traveling companion. I'm willing to take on a talented writer who sees the world in ways most people miss, Sarah corrected. Your age is just a number, Jack. You're more mature than half the guys I knew at UCLA. And besides, she grinned, someone needs to keep me from getting too serious, too intense. You make me laugh. That's worth more than money. I wanted to kiss her, but we were in public, in Millfield, where people notice things, where my mother might have friends who'd report back that they saw Jack Miller kissing that California girl outside the Motor Lodge. So instead I just took her hand and squeezed it. When, I asked, how long do you need to say goodbye, to settle things with your parents, to pack? I thought about it. What did I need to bring? Clothes, my notebooks, a few books, not much really. My whole life could fit in a single bag. The realization was both liberating and sad. A few days, I said, maybe by the weekend. That gives me time to help my dad at the station, to talk to my mother too, to say goodbye to Tommy, I thought but didn't say, to visit his grave one last time before leaving. Saturday, Sarah said decisively. We'll leave Saturday morning. That gives you 4 days. Is that enough? It'll have to be. We sat there for a while making plans. We'd drive east to New York, taking our time, stopping at places that seemed interesting. Sarah wanted to see Niagara Falls. I wanted to stop at the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. Tommy had always talked about visiting there someday. We'd find cheap motels or camp when the weather was good. We'd eat at diners and roadside stands. We'd see America the way it was meant to be seen, slowly, attentively, with open eyes and open hearts. And in New York, I asked, what then? Then we figure it out, Sarah said. I have a friend from college, Deborah, who has an apartment in Greenwich Village. She said I could crash there for a while when I got to the city. Maybe she'd let both of us stay for a bit, just until we get our bearings. You could look for work, maybe try to get some of your writing published. There are newspapers, magazines, journals. Someone will see your talent, Jack, I know it. Her confidence in me was almost frightening. What if I couldn't live up to it? What if I got to New York and discovered I was just a small-town kid with delusions of grandeur, nothing special, nothing worth noticing? But then I thought about my notebooks, about the pages Sarah had read, about her tears when she'd seen what I'd written about my father. Maybe I did have something to say. Maybe it was worth trying. Okay, I said, Saturday, we leave Saturday. Sarah smiled, and it was like the sun coming out. Saturday, she agreed, the beginning of everything. The next 4 days passed in a strange blur, too fast and too slow at the same time. I worked at the station with my father, learning tasks he'd never bothered to teach me before, as if he wanted to make sure I had every skill I might need in the world beyond Millfield. How to negotiate with suppliers, how to handle difficult customers, how to balance the books and manage inventory. Practical things, father things, gifts disguised as lessons. We didn't talk much while we worked. That wasn't our way. But the silence felt different now, not uncomfortable but companionable. Understanding without words the way men of his generation communicated. On Wednesday afternoon, while I was rotating tires on Mrs. Patterson's Buick, my father came out of the office and stood watching me work. You're doing it wrong, he said, but his tone was gentle, instructional rather than critical. He showed me the right way, his hands guiding mine, and I realized with a pang that these were some of the last lessons my father would teach me. After Saturday, I'd be on my own, learning from strangers or from my own mistakes. Dad, I said when we'd finished, thank you for everything, for understanding, for not trying to stop me for. Don't, he interrupted. Don't say goodbye yet, we still have a few days. Let's not waste them on sentimentality. But his hand on my shoulder told me everything his words couldn't. My mother was harder. She avoided me for 2 days, speaking to me only when necessary, her face tight with pain and anger and fear. I tried to talk to her several times, tried to explain, but she'd just shake her head and walk away, unable or unwilling to hear me. On Thursday evening, I found her in Tommy's room. We'd left it unchanged since he'd enlisted. His baseball trophies on the shelf, his posters on the walls, the Beatles, the Cubs, a map of the world with pins marking places he wanted to visit. His bed made with military precision, the way he'd always made it, even before the army taught him how. The room was a shrine now, a monument to the boy who'd left and would never return. My mother sat on the edge of his bed, holding one of his shirts, crying silently. Mom, I said softly from the doorway. She looked up, and the devastation on her face nearly broke me. I come in here sometimes, she said, her voice thick with tears. I can still smell him, his cologne, his soap. If I close my eyes, I can pretend he's just at practice or out with friends or at the station with your father. I can pretend he's coming home. I sat down beside her, careful not to disturb the carefully preserved space. I'm not trying to hurt you, I said. By leaving, that's not what this is about. I know, she said, surprising me. In my head I know that, but my heart is screaming at me to hold on to you, to keep you here where I can see you, where I know you're safe. I can't lose another son, Jack, I can't survive it. You're not losing me, I'm just leaving for a while. I'll write, I'll call, I'll come visit. I'm not enlisting, I'm not going to war, I'm just going to see what else is out there. That's what Tommy said, my mother whispered, that he wasn't going away forever, that he'd be back, and look what happened. I had no answer for that, no reassurance I could offer that would erase her fear, her very justified fear that the world was dangerous and children who left didn't always come home. I'm scared too, I admitted. Terrified, actually, but I'm more scared of staying here and never knowing, never trying, never becoming more than what Millfield expects me to be. Does that make sense? My mother was quiet for a long time, still holding Tommy's shirt, still surrounded by the ghost of her firstborn son. Your father and I, she said finally, we built our whole lives around you boys. You were our purpose, our future. And now one of you is gone and the other is leaving, and I don't know what we're supposed to do, who we're supposed to be. You're supposed to be mom and dad, I said. That doesn't change, and maybe, I hesitated, then continued. Maybe you're supposed to figure out what else you want to be. You're only 43, you have decades left. Maybe this is your chance to discover who Grace Miller is when she's not just somebody's mother. She looked at me with something like wonder. When did you get so wise? I'm not wise, I'm just repeating what Sarah told me about her own mother. Sarah, my mother smiled slightly. That girl is something special, Jack, hold on to her. I'm not sure I can hold on to her. She's not the kind of person you hold on to. She's more like a comet. You get to travel alongside her for a while, but you can't capture her. Maybe that's exactly the kind of person you need, my mother said. Someone who won't let you settle, who'll keep pushing you to be more, do more, see more. She set down Tommy's shirt carefully, smoothing out the wrinkles, and then she turned to me and pulled me into a hug. A real hug, fierce and desperate and full of love. Promise me you'll be careful, she said into my hair. Promise me you'll write every week. Promise me you'll come home if you need to, that you won't be too proud to ask for help. I promise, Mom, all of it, I promise. And promise me, her voice broke, promise me you'll be happy, that all this, leaving and searching and discovering, promise me it'll be worth it, that you'll find what you're looking for. I promise I'll try, I said. That's all I can promise, that I'll try. She held me for a long time, and I let her, understanding that she was memorizing this moment, storing it up against the lonely days ahead. When she finally pulled back, she wiped her eyes and tried to smile. Saturday morning, your father said. Yes, early, Sarah wants to beat the traffic. Then I'll make you breakfast, a good one, pancakes and bacon and eggs. You'll need a proper meal before you go. You don't have to. I want to, she said firmly. Let me do this, Jack. Let me be your mother one more time before you go off and become whoever you're going to become. So I agreed, and we sat together in Tommy's room for a while longer, not talking, just being together, mother and son, in the space that used to hold another son, another brother, another piece of our family. Friday, my last full day in Millfield, I spent saying goodbye. I went to Rosie's diner and had coffee with Rosie herself. She gave me a piece of advice disguised as a lecture. Cities will eat you alive if you let them, she said, refilling my cup. But they'll also show you things small towns can't. Just remember where you came from, Jack Miller. Remember that good people exist everywhere, not just in Millfield. And remember that home is always here if you need it. I stopped by the library and thanked Mrs. Abernethy, the librarian who'd been ordering books for me since I was 10 years old, feeding my hunger for stories and ideas. She gave me a list of used bookstores in New York, places where I could buy cheap paperbacks and maybe sell some of my own work someday. I visited Tommy's grave in the late afternoon when the cemetery was empty and quiet. The headstone was still new, the earth still fresh. Someone, my mother, probably had left flowers. I sat on the grass beside the grave and talked to my brother the way I used to when he was alive, when we'd sit on Miller's Point and dream about the future. I'm leaving tomorrow, I told him, going to New York with Sarah. I know you'd probably think I'm crazy giving up the station, leaving Mom and Dad, but I think maybe you'd understand too. You left to find your purpose, to test yourself, to see what you were made of. That's all I'm doing, just in a different way. The wind rustled through the cemetery trees, and somewhere a bird sang, and I let myself believe that Tommy heard me, that wherever he was, if he was anywhere at all, he approved. I'm going to write about you, I said, not just about you dying, but about you living, about who you really were, not the hero version everyone talks about at funerals, the real Tommy. The brother who taught me to throw a curveball and defended me from bullies and ate the last cookie even though you always said you wouldn't. That Tommy deserves to be remembered. I stayed until the sun started to set, painting the sky those familiar golds and pinks, And then I stood up, brushed off my jeans, and said goodbye to my brother one last time. I love you, I said to the headstone, to the earth, to whatever remained of Tommy in this place. I'll always love you, and I'll make you proud, I promise. That night Sarah came to dinner at our house. My mother had insisted, wanting to share one last meal as a family, or as close to family as we could get now, with Tommy gone and Sarah filling in the gaps. My mother had cooked Tommy's favorite meal, pot roast with potatoes and carrots, homemade rolls, apple pie for dessert. It was probably unconscious, this choice, but it felt right somehow, having his favorite foods at the table even though he couldn't be there to eat them. We ate slowly, savoring the meal and the moment. My father told stories about the station, funny anecdotes about customers I'd known my whole life. My mother asked Sarah about California, about her family, about her plans for New York. Sarah answered patiently, drawing my mother out, making her laugh, giving her something to focus on besides loss. I watched them, my parents and this girl who'd become so important to me in such a short time, and felt a bittersweet ache in my chest. This was what leaving meant, not just going somewhere new but leaving behind something precious. These people, this home, these memories. After dinner we sat on the porch in the twilight, drinking iced tea and watching fireflies dance in the yard. The crickets sang their evening song. Somewhere down the street children played a last game before bedtime. Normal sounds, peaceful sounds, the soundtrack of my childhood. Thank you, my father said to Sarah suddenly, for taking care of him, for being there when we needed help. That meant a lot. You don't have to thank me, Sarah said. I'm honored to be part of this, to know your family. You raised an incredible son, both of your sons, you should be proud. My mother started to cry again. She'd been doing that a lot lately, tears that came and went without warning, and Sarah moved to sit beside her, taking her hand. He'll be fine, Sarah said softly. I'll make sure of it, and he'll write and call and maybe even visit. This isn't goodbye forever, it's just goodbye for now. I know, my mother said. In my head I know, but my heart is having trouble catching up. We sat there until full dark, until the fireflies disappeared and the stars came out, until my mother finally stood and said she needed to go to bed, that tomorrow would come early. My father shook Sarah's hand formally, thanking her again. My mother hugged her, then hugged me, whispering, I love you, into my ear with such fierce intensity that it took my breath away. I love you too, Mom, so much. Then they went inside, and Sarah and I stood alone on the porch in the darkness on the last night of my childhood. Are you ready? She asked quietly. No, I admitted, but I don't think I'll ever be ready, so I might as well go anyway. That's the spirit, she said, and even though I couldn't see her face clearly in the darkness, I could hear the smile in her voice. She kissed me goodnight, a long, sweet kiss that tasted like apple pie and possibility, and then got in her car and drove back to the motor lodge. I stood on the porch for a long time after she left, looking at Millfield spread out before me in the darkness. This town that had been my entire world for 17 years, these streets I'd walked 1,000 times, these houses full of people I'd known my whole life. Tomorrow it would all become memory. Tomorrow I would drive away and everything would change. I was terrified. I was exhilarated. I was ready to begin. Saturday morning arrived with a sunrise so beautiful it seemed like a sign from some benevolent universe that didn't exist. The sky blazed orange and pink, streaked with purple clouds that looked painted on. Birds sang their dawn chorus. The air smelled of cut grass and summer flowers and possibility. I woke before my alarm, dressed in my best jeans and a clean shirt, and carried my single bag downstairs. It wasn't much, some clothes, my notebooks, a few books, the $200 I'd saved tucked into my wallet. Everything I owned that mattered, reduced to £20. My mother was already in the kitchen, true to her word, making breakfast. The smell of bacon and coffee filled the house. She moved mechanically through the familiar motions, cracking eggs, flipping pancakes, setting the table, and I could see she'd been crying, her eyes red and swollen, but she was holding herself together with visible effort. Morning, Mom, I said softly. She turned and managed a smile. Good morning, sweetheart, did you sleep? Some, you. Not much, she set a plate of pancakes in front of me. Eat, you need your strength. My father came down a few minutes later, also already dressed, as if none of us had been able to sleep in on this last morning. We sat at the table together, the three of us, and ate my mother's pancakes in near silence. What was there to say that hadn't already been said? Sarah's coming at 8, my father asked. Yes, we want to get an early start. He nodded, checking his watch. 7:15, 45 minutes left. After breakfast, I washed the dishes while my mother watched, not helping, just standing there as if memorizing the sight of me performing this mundane task. When I finished, I turned to find her crying again, silently, tears streaming down her face. "Mom, I'm sorry," she said, wiping her eyes. "I promised myself I wouldn't do this, that I'd be strong, send you off with a smile. But I can't, Jack, I just can't pretend this doesn't hurt." I held her while she cried. This woman who'd given me life, raised me, loved me unconditionally. I thought about all the times she'd comforted me, skinned knees and bad dreams and heartbreaks. Now I was the one causing her pain, and there was nothing I could do to fix it except promise, again, that I'd be careful, that I'd write, that I'd come back. At 7:45, I carried my bag out to the porch. My father followed, his hands in his pockets, his face unreadable. "You have enough money?" he asked. "I think so. Sarah has money too. We'll be okay." He nodded, then reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. "Here, take this." "Dad, you don't have to." "Take it," he said firmly. "It's not much, $300, emergency money. Don't spend it unless you absolutely have to, and don't tell your mother. She'd worry less if she thought you only had your savings." I opened my mouth to protest, but the look on his face stopped me. This was his way of taking care of me, of being a father even when I was leaving. So I took the envelope and tucked it into my bag. "Thank you, Dad, for everything, for understanding, for not hating me for leaving." "I could never hate you," he said gruffly. "You're my son, my only son now. That doesn't change no matter where you go or what you do." His voice caught. "Just promise me you'll be smart. The world isn't like Millfield. People aren't always what they seem. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is." "I will, I promise. And take care of that girl, Sarah. She's special. Don't let her get away." "I'll try." We stood there awkwardly, two Miller men who didn't know how to express emotion except through practical advice and money hidden in envelopes. Then my father did something unexpected. He pulled me into a hug, tight and fierce, and I felt him shaking. "I'm proud of you," he whispered. "So goddamn proud and scared, but mostly proud." "I love you, Dad." "I love you too, son. Never forget that." At exactly 8 o'clock, Sarah's white Impala turned onto our street. My mother came out onto the porch, wringing her hands, trying to smile. My father stood beside her, his arm around her shoulders. Sarah got out of the car, dressed simply in jeans and a white blouse, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked fresh and ready, excited for the adventure ahead. When she saw my parents, she walked up to the porch. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller," she said, her voice warm but respectful. "I want you to know that I'll take care of Jack. I'll make sure he's safe, that he eats properly, that he doesn't do anything too stupid." She smiled. "Well, not too stupid anyway. We're young. Some stupidity is probably inevitable." My mother laughed despite her tears. "Thank you, Sarah, for everything. You're a good girl, a good friend." "More than a friend, I hope," Sarah said, glancing at me. "If Jack will have me." My father stepped forward and shook her hand formally. "You're welcome in our home anytime," he said. "Both of you. If things don't work out, if you need to come back, there's no shame in it. The door is always open." "Thank you, sir. That means the world." Then there was nothing left to do but leave. I hugged my mother one last time, feeling her shake with suppressed sobs. "I love you, Mom, so much. Thank you for everything. For raising me, for loving me, for letting me go." "Come back to me," she whispered fiercely. "Promise me you'll come back." "I promise, maybe not right away, but I'll come back. This will always be home." I shook my father's hand, then pulled him into one more hug. "Take care of each other," I said. "Don't spend all your time grieving. Live, Tommy would want you to live." "We'll try," my father said. "You do the same." I picked up my bag and walked to Sarah's car, opened the passenger door, threw my bag in the back seat. Sarah got behind the wheel, started the engine. The radio crackled to life. Simon and Garfunkel, The Boxer, which seemed almost too perfect, too on the nose. I looked back at my parents standing on the porch of the house where I'd grown up, my mother waving through her tears, my father standing solid and still, his face a mask of controlled emotion. Behind them, the house itself, white clapboard, green shutters, a home full of memories both beautiful and painful. "Ready?" Sarah asked softly. "Ready," I said, though my throat was tight and my eyes were burning. She put the car in gear and we pulled away from the curb. I watched my parents in the side mirror, getting smaller and smaller, until we turned the corner and they disappeared from view. Just like that, I was gone. Just like that, my childhood ended. We drove through Millfield slowly, a last tour of the place I was leaving behind, past the gas station where my father would be opening soon if he wasn't already, past Rosie's Diner, still closed this early on a Saturday, past the church where we'd held Tommy's funeral, past the cemetery where he lay beneath fresh earth, past the Sleepy Time Motor Lodge where Sarah had stayed for 2 weeks, where this whole adventure had started. Past the library, the Five and Dime, the post office, all the landmarks of my life. And then we reached the town limits, that faded sign that read MILLFILD Pop 3247, except someone would need to change it now, I thought. Pop 3246, one less Miller in Millfield. Sarah accelerated as we hit Route 9, heading east toward Indianapolis, toward Ohio, toward New York, toward everything unknown and uncharted. The morning sun was in front of us, bright and promising. The road stretched out, empty and inviting. "How do you feel?" Sarah asked, glancing over at me. I thought about it. How did I feel? Sad, definitely. Scared, absolutely. Guilty for leaving my parents. Excited about what lay ahead. Overwhelmed by the enormity of what I'd just done. Free, I said finally. Terrified and sad and guilty, but also free. Is that terrible? No, Sarah said firmly. It's human. You're allowed to feel multiple things at once. Grief and excitement can exist together. Loss and hope. Goodbye and hello. She reached over and took my hand, laced her fingers through mine, and we drove like that for a while, connected, heading toward a future neither of us could predict. On the radio, the song changed. Creedence Clearwater Revival Now, Green River, and I thought about rivers and how they only flow one direction, how you can never step in the same one twice, how leaving means accepting that you can't go back to exactly what was. But maybe that was okay, maybe that was the point. Thank you, I said to Sarah, for this, for staying, for helping my family, for inviting me along on your adventure. I know I'm probably going to be a burden sometimes, a broke kid with big dreams and no experience, but I'll pull my weight. Jack, she interrupted, squeezing my hand. Stop, you're not a burden, you're a companion, a partner, an adventure buddy. We're doing this together. Both of us figuring it out as we go. Both of us scared and excited and uncertain. That's what makes it an adventure instead of just a trip. Okay, I said, smiling despite the tightness in my chest. Together. Together, she confirmed. We drove through the Indiana countryside as the sun climbed higher, turning the fields golden. We passed farms and small towns, gas stations and diners, all the familiar landscape of the Midwest. But even though it looked the same as always, it felt different now. I was seeing it with new eyes, traveler's eyes, storing up images and impressions for the stories I would write. Around 10 o'clock, we stopped for gas in a small town whose name I didn't catch. While Sarah pumped gas, she insisted on doing it herself, said she needed to stay practiced. I went inside to use the restroom and buy us sodas. When I came back out, I found her leaning against the car, looking at a map spread across the hood. I was thinking, she said, tracing a route with her finger. We could take 70 all the way to Pennsylvania, straight shot. We'd be in New York by Tuesday, maybe Wednesday, but she looked up at me. What if we took our time, took back roads, stopped at interesting places? We're not in a rush, not really. What about your friend in New York, Deborah? Won't she be expecting you? I'll call her from the next town, let her know we're taking the scenic route. She'll understand. That's kind of the point of this whole trip, to see America, not just to get from point A to point B as fast as possible. I looked at the map, at all the roads and towns and possibilities. A straight line to New York or a meandering path through unknown territory, safety or adventure, the expected or the uncertain. Scenic route, I decided. Definitely scenic route. Sarah grinned and folded up the map. Good choice. Okay, navigator, where to first? I thought about it. East, I said. Let's just head east and see what we find. East it is. We got back in the car and continued on. No real plan except to keep moving, keep discovering, keep being open to whatever came next. The radio played the Beatles, the Stones, the Temptations, all the sounds of 1969, and we sang along when we knew the words, hummed when we didn't. Around noon we stopped at a roadside diner for lunch. It looked exactly like Rosie's, same silver railcar design, same red vinyl booths, same tired waitress who'd probably been working there since the Eisenhower administration. We ordered cheeseburgers and fries and chocolate milkshakes, and while we ate, Sarah asked me about my plans. What do you want to do first, when we get to New York? I don't know, I admitted. Find a job, I guess, something to pay the bills while I write. Maybe a newspaper if they'd hire me, or a bookstore, something around words. And then I write, really write, not just observations in notebooks but actual stories, things that matter, things that capture what it's like to be alive right now in 1969 when everything's changing and nothing makes sense. What kind of stories? I thought about it, eating a French fry, watching truckers and families and travelers like us coming and going from the diner. True stories, I said, about real people, real places, about America the way it actually is, not the sanitized version you see on TV or read about in glossy magazines. Stories about people like my parents, like the customers at the gas station, like soldiers coming home from Vietnam. Stories about what we're losing and what we're becoming. That's good, Sarah said. That's important. Someone needs to tell those stories. What about you? What do you want to do in New York? She smiled, stirring her milkshake with her straw. Everything. I want to see plays on Broadway, visit museums, eat at restaurants from every culture imaginable. I want to go to poetry readings in the village, hear jazz in smoky clubs, meet artists and writers and people who are making things, creating things. I want to absorb it all, experience it all, figure out what kind of person I want to be when I'm not somebody's daughter or somebody's girlfriend, or whatever role people expect me to play. You never did tell me, I said, what your parents wanted you to do after college. Her face darkened slightly. Get married to this guy Peter, who's the son of my father's business partner. Nice enough guy, perfectly pleasant, completely wrong for me. They had it all planned out, engagement by Christmas, wedding in the spring, Barbies within a year. My whole life mapped out before I'd even lived any of it. And you said no. I said no, told them I needed time to think, to experience the world first. They were furious, disappointed. My mother cried and said I was throwing away my future. My father said I was being selfish and immature. She shrugged. Maybe I am, but it's my life to be selfish with, right? Right, I agreed, definitely right. We finished lunch and got back on the road, heading through Ohio now, the landscape gradually changing from flat farmland to rolling hills. We passed through small towns with names like Hope and Liberty and New Concord, each one a little universe unto itself, full of people living lives I'd never know, stories I'd never hear. Late in the afternoon, we came across a historical marker by the side of the road. Sarah pulled over, curious. The National Road, she read aloud. America's first highway, built in the 1800s to connect the East Coast to the western frontier. This is history, Jack. We're literally driving on the road that opened up America. We stood there for a moment on this historic road, and I thought about all the people who'd traveled this way before us. Settlers heading west in covered wagons, families during the Depression fleeing the Dust Bowl, soldiers going to war, lovers running away together, dreamers and drifters and everyone in between. We were just the latest travelers on an ancient path, following in the footsteps of everyone who'd ever wanted something more, something different, something beyond the horizon. We should document this, Sarah said suddenly. The trip, I mean, not just pass through places but really capture them. You could write about what we see and I could. She paused, thinking. I brought a camera, a Polaroid. We could take pictures, create a record of this journey, your words and my images. What do you think? I think that's brilliant, I said. A collaboration, the writer and the photographer documenting America. Partners, she said, holding out her hand to shake on it. Partners, I agreed, taking her hand. But instead of shaking, she pulled me close and kissed me, right there on the side of the National Road, with trucks rumbling past and the Ohio countryside stretching out around us. When we pulled apart, she was grinning. Okay, partner, let's find somewhere to stay for the night. I'm thinking somewhere more interesting than a motel. Maybe we can camp. I have a tent in the trunk. You have a tent? I came prepared for anything, she said, including picking up hitchhikers with broken hearts and big dreams. I wasn't hitchhiking. You were emotionally hitchhiking, she said, looking for a ride out of your life, and I stopped, so here we are. Here we were indeed. We drove until sunset, then found a state park with campsites. Sarah had all the gear, tent, sleeping bags, a camp stove. We set up camp as the sky turned purple and stars began to appear, and cooked hot dogs over a fire like kids at summer camp. Other campers surrounded us, families with children, older couples in RVs, a group of college kids with guitars who played songs around their own fire. We were all strangers, but there was a camaraderie to it, a sense of shared experience. We were all out here, away from home, seeking something. After dinner, Sarah and I walked down to a small lake at the edge of the campground. The moon was rising, nearly full, painting a silver path across the water. Frogs sang in the reeds. The night air was cool and perfect. First day, Sarah said, skipping a stone across the water. How was it? Good, I said, sad and scary and exciting, all of it at once. That's life, she said, all of it at once. The trick is not running from the hard parts but not letting them overshadow the beautiful parts either. Balance. We stood there for a while, watching the moon on the water, and I thought about my parents back in Millfield, about Tommy in his grave, about the life I'd left behind and the life I was heading toward. And I thought about this moment, right here, right now, standing by a lake in Ohio with a girl I'd known for 2 weeks who'd somehow become essential to my story. This perfect, impossible moment that would never come again. I'm glad you stopped at our gas station, I said. That day, I'm glad you needed gas in Millfield, Indiana. Me too, Sarah said softly, me too. We walked back to our campsite hand in hand and crawled into the tent, into our separate sleeping bags, still maintaining propriety, still aware of the rules even as we broke them by traveling together. We talked for hours, our voices soft in the darkness, sharing stories and dreams and fears until sleep finally claimed us. My last conscious thought before drifting off was that this was the beginning. Not just of a journey, but of a life. My life. The one I'd choose for myself. And whatever came next, success or failure, joy or sorrow, triumph or disaster, it would be mine. That was enough. That was everything. We woke to birdsong and dappled sunlight filtering through the tent fabric. For a moment, disoriented by sleep, I couldn't remember where I was. Then I heard Sarah stirring in her sleeping bag beside me, heard the sounds of the campground coming to life around us, children laughing, someone starting a generator, the smell of coffee and bacon drifting through the morning air, and I remembered. I'd left home, I was on the road, everything had changed. Morning, Sarah said, her voice still thick with sleep. Her hair was tousled, her face without makeup, and she looked younger, somehow more real. Sleep okay? Better than I expected, I said. You? Like a rock, there's something about sleeping outside that just, I don't know, it feels right, somehow more natural. We packed up camp efficiently, working together like we'd been doing this for years instead of one night. Sarah made instant coffee on the camp stove while I folded the tent. We ate granola bars and oranges for breakfast, then loaded everything back into the Impala. Where to today? I asked, studying the map. Let's aim for Pennsylvania, Sarah said, but take our time getting there, stop whenever something looks interesting. So we did. We drove through small Ohio towns with brick downtown squares and churches with white steeples. We stopped at a farmer's market in a town called Zanesville and bought fresh peaches and homemade bread from a woman who reminded me of my mother. We visited a tiny museum in Cambridge that celebrated the history of glassmaking in the region, wandering through rooms full of delicate, beautiful objects created by craftsmen whose names no one remembered. That's what I want to avoid, I told Sarah as we left the museum, creating something beautiful and then being forgotten, leaving no mark, no legacy except objects in a case that people glance at without really seeing. So don't be forgotten, Sarah said simply. Write things that matter, tell stories that stick in people's hearts, make them remember you. That's a lot of pressure. You asked for it when you decided to be a writer, she said, grinning. Artists don't get to play it safe. Around noon, we crossed into Pennsylvania. The landscape changed subtly, more hills, more trees, everything a deeper green. We stopped for lunch at a truck stop, sat at the counter next to a long-haul driver who looked like he hadn't slept in days. Where you kids headed? He asked, his voice gravelly from cigarettes and exhaustion. New York, Sarah said. Eventually, we're taking the scenic route. Smart, he said. I've been driving this route for 20 years and I still miss things. Always rushing, always trying to make good time, but the good stuff, it's in the spaces between, the little towns, the weird roadside attractions, the diners where the pie is homemade and the coffee's strong. He stirred his coffee thoughtfully. You only get one life, you know, one chance to see what's out there. Don't waste it trying to get somewhere fast. The journey is the destination, or whatever the hell that saying is. Where are you headed? I asked. Chicago, then back to Pittsburgh, then who knows, wherever they tell me to go, that's the job. He smiled, but it was tired, worn thin. 20 years of going wherever they tell me. Don't do that, kids, go where you want to go while you still can. After he left, Sarah and I sat quietly for a moment, both of us thinking about his words. Do you think he's happy? Sarah asked, the truck driver. I don't know, I said. He's made a life, pays his bills, but is it the life he wanted, or just the one he ended up with? That's the question, isn't it? Sarah said. How do you make sure you end up with the life you want instead of the one that just happens to you? By making choices, I said. By leaving when you need to leave, by saying no to expectations, I gestured at us at the truck stop at the road beyond, by doing exactly what we're doing. We drove on through Pennsylvania, through the Appalachian foothills, up and down roads that twisted through forests so thick the sunlight barely penetrated. We stopped at a roadside stand and bought fresh corn and tomatoes from an old man who told us stories about the Depression, about when these roads had been dirt and travel had been measured in days instead of hours. Late in the afternoon, we came upon a sign, Niagarafalls 180 miles. Sarah pulled over, looking at the sign with visible longing. I've always wanted to see it, she said, ever since I was a little girl reading about it in books. The power of all that water, the sheer scale of it. It seems impossible, doesn't it, that nature could create something so overwhelming, so beautiful. It's out of the way, I pointed out, though I didn't really care. We had no schedule, no deadline. Everything good is out of the way, Sarah said. Besides, when else will we get the chance? When we're old and settled and responsible. Now's the time for detours, Jack, now while we're young and free and have nothing but time. Then let's go, I said. Let's see the falls. She whooped with joy, actually whooped, loud enough that a passing car honked and the driver waved and swung the car around, heading north now instead of east. We drove through the afternoon and into evening, the landscape gradually flattening out as we approached Lake Erie. We stopped for dinner at a diner in Erie, Pennsylvania, and called ahead to a motel near the falls, booking a room. A room, singular. We didn't discuss it, didn't make a big decision about it. It just seemed natural, logical. We'd been traveling together, sleeping in the same tent. A motel room with 2 beds wasn't really different, except of course it was different and we both knew it, and the unspoken understanding between us made the air feel charged with possibility. We reached the falls just as the sun was setting, and Sarah insisted we go see them immediately, even though we were tired from driving. Tomorrow it might rain, she said, or the world might end, or we might change our minds. We're here now, let's see them now. So we parked near the state park and walked toward the sound of water, a roar that grew louder and louder as we approached, until it was overwhelming, a physical force that you could feel in your chest. And then we saw them. Niagara Falls. I'd seen pictures, of course, everyone has, but pictures couldn't capture the reality of it, the sheer volume of water pouring over the edge, the mist that rose like smoke, the rainbows caught in the spray, the sound that drowned out everything else. It was primal, awesome in the original sense of the word, nature displaying its power with casual indifference to human scale. Sarah grabbed my hand, squeezing tight, and I saw tears on her face. It's so beautiful, she said, having to shout over the roar. It's so impossibly beautiful. We stood there for a long time, just watching, just experiencing. Other tourists surrounded us, taking pictures, pointing, exclaiming, but they felt distant, unimportant. It was just us and the falls and the overwhelming presence of something greater than ourselves. Thank you, Sarah said later as we walked back to the car in the twilight, for agreeing to the detour, for understanding that sometimes you have to chase the beautiful things even when they're out of the way. Thank you, I countered, for showing me that beautiful things are worth chasing, for teaching me that the detour is the journey. Back at the motel, a modest place called the Rainbow Motor Inn, we got our key from a bored clerk and found our room. It was standard-issue American motel, 2 double beds with floral bedspreads, a TV bolted to the dresser, a bathroom with thin towels and tiny soaps wrapped in paper. But it felt significant somehow. Our first real room, our first night truly alone together away from camping neighbors and public spaces. Sarah set down her bag and immediately went to the window, pulling back the curtain to reveal a view of the parking lot. Romantic, she said dryly. Very, I agreed. We looked at each other and suddenly the tension that had been building all day, maybe all week, became palpable. We were here, alone, 2 beds, yes, but also 1 room, 1 night, 1 decision to make or not make. I'm going to take a shower, Sarah said finally, breaking the moment. A real shower with hot water and actual water pressure. After 2 weeks of motels and camping, it's going to be heaven. While she showered, I sat on one of the beds and pulled out my notebook. I tried to write about the falls, about leaving home, about the journey so far, but the words wouldn't come. My mind was too full, too scattered, too focused on the sound of water running in the bathroom and what it meant that we were here together in this room. Sarah emerged 20 minutes later, her hair wet and hanging loose, wearing pajama shorts and a t-shirt, her face scrubbed clean. She looked soft and young and beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with makeup or presentation and everything to do with simply being herself. Your turn, she said, and I fled to the bathroom like a coward. The shower was good, the hot water working out the kinks from 2 days of driving and camping. I stood under the spray for a long time, trying to calm my racing thoughts, trying to figure out what I wanted, what was right, what should happen next. When I came out toweling my hair, I found Sarah sitting on her bed, her legs crossed, working on something in her lap. Come see, she said, and I sat beside her. She'd been organizing the Polaroids she'd taken over the past 2 days, pictures of the road, of small towns, of the Ohio campground, of me looking at maps or eating lunch or standing by historical markers. She'd also started a journal, I realized, pasting in the photos and writing captions and observations around them. A collaborative project, she explained. Your words, my pictures, we'll create a record of this journey this summer, something to remember, to look back on when we're old. Can I add to it? I asked. Write some observations, descriptions. Please do, that's the whole point. We're creating this together. So we sat on her bed, shoulder to shoulder, and worked on the journal. I wrote about leaving Millfield, about the truck driver's advice, about the museum full of forgotten craftsmen. Sarah pasted in photos and added her own observations, her handwriting graceful and flowing beside my cramped scrawl. It was intimate, this collaboration, creating something together, building a shared memory, our words and images intertwining like our lives were intertwining. Jack, Sarah said eventually, setting down her pen. Yes. I need to tell you something, before this goes any further, before whatever happens next happens, you need to know something about me. My heart sank. Here it came, the revelation that would change everything, that would reveal why this was all too good to be true. Okay, I said carefully. She took a breath, not looking at me. I was engaged, last year, to that guy I mentioned, Peter, my parents' choice, but I convinced myself I loved him. We were going to get married right after graduation. Big wedding, all our families, the whole thing. She paused and I waited. And then 2 months before the wedding I realized I couldn't do it, not because Peter was a bad person, he wasn't. He was kind and decent and would have made someone a perfectly good husband, but not me. I didn't love him. I loved the idea of making my parents happy, of following the script they'd written for me, but I didn't love him. What did you do? I called off the wedding 3 weeks before the ceremony, destroyed my mother, horrified my father, humiliated Peter and his family. It was a disaster, a scandal. People still talk about it back home, the Brennan girl who ran away from a perfectly good marriage. That's why you're on this trip, I said, understanding, not just to see America, to get away from the aftermath. Partly yes, to prove I could be on my own, could make my own choices, but also, she finally looked at me, also to figure out who I am when I'm not trying to please everyone else. And Jack, what I've figured out is that I don't want to live a safe life. I don't want to make sensible choices and follow expected paths. I want to feel things, experience things, take risks. Okay, I said slowly, not sure where she was going with this. What I'm trying to say is, she reached for my hand. I like you, really like you, not because you're safe or expected or appropriate, but because you're real and honest and you see the world the way I do. And I think you like me too, but I need you to know that I'm not looking for another engagement, another scripted future. I'm looking for now. For this moment, this summer, this adventure. Can you accept that? Can you be okay with not knowing where this goes? I thought about it, about my own reasons for leaving Millfield, to escape expectation, to discover myself, to avoid being trapped by other people's plans for my life. Sarah was offering me exactly what I'd been seeking: freedom, possibility, the chance to live without guarantees. I can accept that, I said. I want that too, no expectations, no pressure, just us, whatever that means. She smiled, relieved and happy, and kissed me. Not the sweet, tentative kisses we'd shared before, but something deeper, more certain. A kiss that promised nothing except this moment, this connection, this truth. We kissed for a long time, and when we finally pulled apart, we were both breathing hard. I should probably go to my own bed, I said, not moving. You probably should, Sarah agreed, also not moving. Tomorrow's going to be another long day of driving. Definitely need our rest. Separate beds are more practical. Much more practical. Neither of us moved. Or, Sarah said softly, you could stay here with me, just to sleep, just to be close. Nothing we're not ready for, just together. Just together, I agreed. So I stayed. We turned off the light and lay down on her bed, fully clothed, wrapped in each other's arms. Through the window I could hear the distant roar of the falls, a reminder that the world contained wonders we were only beginning to discover. Jack, Sarah whispered in the darkness. Yes. Thank you for understanding. About the engagement, about not needing guarantees, about all of it. Thank you for being honest, I said, for trusting me enough to tell me. Partners, she said, echoing our earlier promise. Partners, I confirmed. We fell asleep like that, holding each other, two young people on the edge of their futures, choosing freedom over certainty, experience over safety, the unknown over the predictable. And somewhere in the darkness, I thought about Tommy, about how he'd left home seeking purpose and found death, about how my leaving was different but also the same, both of us trying to become more than what Millfield would let us be. I hope you'd understand, I thought, speaking to my dead brother across the distance. I hope you'd approve of this choice, this girl, this journey. I hope you're somewhere watching, proud that I found the courage to leave. The falls roared on through the night, eternal and indifferent, and I slept better than I had since the telegram arrived, held safe in Sarah's arms, dreaming of roads that led to places I'd never been, stories I'd never told, a life I was only beginning to imagine. We left Niagara Falls the next morning after another visit to see the falls in daylight. The morning sun transformed the mist into a kaleidoscope of rainbows, and tourists crowded the viewing platforms, snapping pictures and pointing. But Sarah and I stood slightly apart, content just to watch, to absorb, to remember. You know what strikes me? I said, my arm around her waist. All this power, all this beauty, and it just keeps going. Day after day, year after year, century after century. It doesn't care if anyone's watching. It doesn't need an audience. It just is. That's what I love about nature, Sarah said. It doesn't perform. It doesn't pretend. It's completely indifferent to human drama, and somehow that's comforting. Like no matter what happens to us, our wars, our heartbreaks, our tiny human catastrophes, the falls will still be here, just being what they are. I pulled out my notebook and wrote that down, her words and mine, trying to capture not just what we saw but what it meant, how it felt to stand before something so much larger than ourselves. Back on the road, we headed southeast toward New York. The landscape changed as we drove, more industrial now, more populated. Small towns gave way to bigger ones, farmland to suburbs, open sky to highways crowded with traffic. By late afternoon, we could see it in the distance, the New York City skyline, a jagged line of steel and glass rising from the earth like something from a science fiction story. From miles away, it looked impossible, a city so dense and vertical it seemed to defy physics. There it is, Sarah breathed, her hands tight on the steering wheel. That's where we're going, that's where everything happens. My stomach fluttered with nerves and excitement. I'd never been to a city larger than Indianapolis. The scale of New York, even from a distance, was overwhelming. How did people live like that, stacked on top of each other, surrounded by millions of strangers? You okay? Sarah asked, glancing at me. Nervous, I admitted. What if I hate it? What if I can't handle it? What if I'm just a small-town kid who doesn't belong in a place like that? Then we'll figure it out, Sarah said calmly. But Jack, you won't hate it, I can already tell. Cities are made for people like you, people who watch, who listen, who collect stories. Every person on every street corner is a potential story. Every building has a history, every neighborhood has a culture. You're going to love it. How do you know? Because I know you, she said simply. I know what makes you come alive, and this place, it's going to set you on fire. We crossed into New York State as the sun began its descent. Traffic thickened, grew more aggressive. Drivers honked and cut each other off with casual disregard. Road signs advertised things I'd only heard about: the Lincoln Tunnel, the George Washington Bridge, exits for the Bronx and Queens and Brooklyn, names that felt almost mythical. Sarah navigated it all with surprising confidence, weaving through traffic, reading signs, making decisions. She'd studied the maps, prepared for this moment. I was just along for the ride, wide-eyed and overwhelmed, watching America's largest city reveal itself mile by mile. We're going to Greenwich Village, Sarah explained as we entered the city proper. That's where my friend Deborah lives. It's an artist's neighborhood, writers, painters, musicians, actors, lots of coffee shops and bookstores and clubs, very bohemian, very accepting of, well, of people like us, people who don't fit the normal mold. The city closed in around us, buildings so tall they blocked out the sky, streets packed with cars and taxis and people, so many people, more people than I'd seen in my entire life in Millfield. They moved with purpose and speed, weaving between cars, jaywalking, shouting to each other in a dozen different languages. The noise was incredible, horns honking, sirens wailing, music blaring from open windows, jackhammers tearing up pavement, the rumble of the subway beneath our feet. It was chaos, it was energy, it was terrifying and exhilarating and completely overwhelming. Sarah parked on a narrow street lined with brownstones and small shops. A sign proclaimed we were on Christopher Street. People sat on stoops and fire escapes, talking and laughing. A man played guitar on a corner, his case open for donations. Two women walked past holding hands and nobody seemed to notice or care. This is it, Sarah said, turning off the engine. Welcome to the village, welcome to New York. We grabbed our bags and Sarah led me to a building halfway down the block. She pressed a buzzer, waited, then pressed it again. A voice crackled through the intercom, female, amused. Sarah Brennan, you're 3 weeks late. I took the scenic route, Sarah said, grinning at the speaker box. Can we come up? Long story, good story, buzz us up and I'll tell you everything. The door buzzed and clicked, and we climbed 4 flights of narrow stairs to an apartment at the top. The door was already open, and a young woman stood in the doorway, tall and willowy, with dark skin and an enormous afro, wearing bell-bottom jeans and a tie-dyed shirt, beaded necklaces clicking as she moved. Sarah, she pulled Sarah into a hug, then stepped back to look at me. And who's this? Please tell me this is the good story. Deborah, this is Jack Miller. Jack, this is Deborah Washington, my favorite person from UCLA and the best photographer you've never heard of yet. Photographer, I said, shaking her hand. Sarah's a photographer too. Amateur compared to Deb, Sarah said. She's the real deal, had a show in a gallery last spring, sells prints to magazines, the whole thing. Stop, you're embarrassing me, Deborah said, but she looked pleased. Come in, you must be exhausted. How long have you been driving? 4 days, Sarah said as we entered the apartment. We took our time, stopped at Niagara Falls, camped in Ohio. It was perfect. The apartment was small but charming. One main room that served as living room, dining room and kitchen, with a tiny bedroom visible through an open door, and a bathroom I assumed was somewhere in between. But the walls were covered with photographs, black and white images of city streets, protest marches, jazz musicians, ordinary people caught in extraordinary moments. A typewriter sat on a desk by the window. Books overflowed from shelves and stacked on the floor. It was cluttered and lived in and somehow exactly right. So, Deborah said, settling into a worn armchair and gesturing for us to sit on the couch. Tell me everything. Where did you find this one? She nodded at me. And why is he looking at my apartment like he's never seen one before? Small town Indiana, I explained. This is my first time in any city bigger than Indianapolis. I'm a little overwhelmed. Indiana, Deborah repeated, studying me with interest. And what brings a boy from Indiana to New York City with my friend Sarah? That, Sarah said, is indeed the good story. So we told her not everything, some things were too private, too raw, but the essentials. How we'd met at the gas station, Tommy's death, my decision to leave, the journey across country, our plan to stay in New York for a while to see what happened, to figure out our futures. Deborah listened intently, asking questions, nodding at the right moments. When we finished, she was quiet for a beat, then said, "First, I'm sorry about your brother Jack, that's a profound loss. Second, I admire your courage for leaving, for choosing the unknown over the expected. And third," she looked at Sarah with raised eyebrows, "you're both welcome to crash here as long as you need. I have the couch, which is lumpy but serviceable, and I can probably find some floor space and spare blankets. It'll be tight, but it's yours if you want it." "Really?" Sarah said. "Deb, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to, I want to. Besides, it'll be nice to have company. This city can get lonely even when you're surrounded by 8 million people, maybe especially then." "We can pay rent," I said quickly. "Once I find work, I don't want to freeload." "We'll figure it out," Deborah said. "For now, just get settled. There's a bodega on the corner where you can get food. The subway is 2 blocks that way," she pointed, "which will take you anywhere in the city. And if you're looking for work, Jack, there are newspapers and magazines all over the city that hire freelancers. You any good?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "I've never tried professionally, I just write." "Let me see something," Deborah said, "if you've got anything with you." I hesitated, then pulled out my notebook, the one with my most recent observations, including what I'd written about Tommy, about leaving home, about the journey. I handed it to her, feeling like I was handing over a piece of my soul. Deborah read slowly, carefully, her face giving nothing away. The silence stretched out uncomfortably. Sarah reached over and took my hand, squeezing encouragement. Finally, Deborah looked up. "You can write," she said simply. "Really write. This piece about your father, about his hands, that's publishable, Jack, with some polish, some editing, but the bones are there, the heart is there." Relief flooded through me. "Really? Really? Look, I know some editors, some people at alternative papers and journals. They're always looking for fresh voices, especially voices that capture real America, not the Madison Avenue version. Let me make some calls, see if I can get you some meetings. No promises, but it's a start." "Thank you," I said, feeling like I might cry. Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Deborah said, handing back my notebook. "Thank me when you sell something. For now, just keep writing. Write about everything you see here. The city, the people, the chaos. Capture it the way you captured your hometown. That's what they'll want, authentic voices, true stories." We talked late into the night, Deborah telling us about the village, about the art scene, about protests and poetry readings and underground newspapers. She explained which neighborhoods to avoid, which were safe, which were changing. She talked about the summer so far, the tension in the city, the heat, the way everything felt like it was building towards something, some explosion nobody could predict. "It's been a strange summer," she said. "We landed on the moon, which should have united everyone, but instead it just highlighted how divided we are. Some people are celebrating American achievement, others are asking why we can spend billions on space while people starve in Harlem. And the war," she shook her head. "The war just keeps grinding on, killing boys, destroying families. We're all so tired, you know, tired of fighting, tired of protesting, tired of everything." "But you keep fighting anyway," Sarah said. "What choice do we have?" Deborah said. "Give up, accept it? No, we keep pushing, keep demanding change, keep believing it's possible. Some days I believe it more than others. Today, with you two here, fresh-faced and hopeful, today I believe it." Around midnight, exhausted from the drive and the emotions of the day, Sarah and I set up our makeshift bed on the couch. It was lumpy, like Deborah had warned, and barely big enough for both of us, but we made it work, curled together like puzzle pieces. Through the window, we could hear the city traffic and voices and music, the urban symphony that apparently never stopped. It was so different from Millfield, from the quiet nights where the loudest sound was crickets or a distant train. Here, life continued around the clock, perpetual motion, endless energy. "Are you glad we came?" Sarah whispered in the darkness. "Ask me tomorrow," I said, "when I'm less overwhelmed, but yeah, I think so. It's terrifying, but also electric, like anything could happen." "Anything can happen," Sarah said. "That's the beauty and the terror of it. We're not in Millfield anymore, Jack. We're in the place where dreams are made or broken, where people become who they're meant to be." "No pressure," I said dryly, and she laughed softly. "No pressure," she agreed, "just possibility." I lay there for a long time, listening to the city, feeling Sarah's heartbeat against my chest, trying to process everything that had happened in just 1 week. 7 days ago, I'd been pumping gas in Millfield, my biggest concern whether I'd have time to write before dinner. Now I was in New York City, sleeping on a couch in Greenwich Village, preparing to try to become a professional writer. 7 days, 1 week, it felt like a lifetime. I thought about Tommy, wondered what he'd think of all this. Would he approve? Would he call me crazy? Would he be proud that I'd taken a risk, or disappointed that I'd left our parents? I'd never know. That was the cruel reality of death. It froze people in time, left you forever guessing at what they might have thought or said or done. But I could honor him by living, by taking the chances he'd never get, by seeing the world and telling its stories, including his. That would have to be enough. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of city garbage trucks rumbling down the street. Sarah was already up, sitting at Deborah's kitchen table with both women, laughing about something. "Morning, sleepyhead," Sarah said when she saw me stirring. "It's past 10, we let you sleep in." I sat up, disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings, then remembered, New York, the village, our new temporary home. "There's coffee," Deborah said, pointing to a pot on the stove. "And I made some calls this morning. Got you an appointment this afternoon at the East Village Other. It's an alternative newspaper, very countercultural, very anti-establishment. They might not have paid positions, but they take freelance submissions. It's a foot in the door at least." "This afternoon," I said, panic rising. "I'm not ready, I don't have a resume, I don't have clips, I don't have." "You have your notebook," Sarah interrupted. "You have your voice, that's all you need, Jack. Just be yourself, show them what you showed us, they'll see what we see. And if they don't, then you try somewhere else," Deborah said practically. "New York is full of newspapers and magazines. Someone will say yes eventually, you just have to keep trying until they do." So that afternoon, wearing my cleanest shirt and carrying my notebook like a shield, I walked to the East Village Other's office, a cramped third-floor walk-up that smelled like cigarettes and ink and possibility. The editor who met with me was a woman named Ruth, maybe 30, with straight dark hair and glasses, wearing jeans and a work shirt covered in coffee stains. She looked exhausted and harried and completely unimpressed by me. "You're the kid from Indiana that Deb called about," she said, not looking up from the papers on her desk. "Yes, ma'am, Jack Miller." "Don't call me ma'am, I'm not your teacher. What have you got for me?" I handed her my notebook, open to the piece about my father. She read it while I sat there sweating, sure she was going to laugh me out of the office, tell me to go back to Indiana where I belonged. Instead, she looked up with something like interest. "This is good," she said. "Raw but good, real. We need more of this, working-class voices, middle America perspectives. Everyone wants to write about the revolution, about protests and communes and radical politics, but nobody's writing about regular people just trying to live their lives. Your father, the gas station, small-town America dealing with the war, that's a story people need to hear." "Really?" I said, hardly daring to believe it. "Really, here's the deal, I can't hire you. We're broke, barely keeping the lights on, but I can publish this." She tapped the notebook. "If you're willing to let me edit it, clean it up a bit, no payment, but you'll get a byline. And if it lands well, maybe we can find you more work, other pieces, maybe eventually some cash. Sound good?" "It sounds amazing," I said, grinning like an idiot. "Don't get too excited. We're a small paper, mostly distributed in the village and parts of Brooklyn. You're not going to be famous, but it's a start." She pulled out a contract, 1 page, simple. "Sign this, give me permission to edit and publish. I'll need a final draft in 2 weeks. Think you can do that?" "Yes," I said, signing before she could change her mind. "Absolutely, thank you so much." "Don't thank me, just write good stories. That's all anyone wants, good stories told honestly. Can you do that?" "I can try," I said. "Then we'll get along fine." I walked out of that office feeling 10 feet tall, my first real assignment, My first step toward becoming not just someone who wrote, but a writer, someone whose work would be published, read by strangers, exist in the world beyond my notebooks. I found Sarah and Deborah at a coffee shop they'd mentioned, a place called Caf Reggio that smelled like espresso and possibility. When they saw my face, they knew. "You got it," Sarah said, jumping up. "I got it. She's going to publish the piece about my father. No money, but a byline, a real byline in a real paper." Sarah threw her arms around me, kissing me right there in the coffee shop, and Deborah laughed and ordered us celebratory cappuccinos that cost more than I'd expected but tasted like victory. "This is just the beginning," Deborah said, raising her cup in a toast, to Jack Miller, soon-to-be famous writer. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," I said, but I was grinning too hard to sound modest. "To beginnings," Sarah amended, "to taking chances, to leaving home, to becoming who we're meant to be." "To beginnings," we echoed and drank to the future, to possibility, to everything we hoped we might become. Outside, the city continued its endless motion, people rushing past, cars honking, sirens wailing. But inside that coffee shop, for just a moment, the world felt perfect. Tommy would have been proud, I thought. He would have teased me about being a starving artist, about chasing impractical dreams. But underneath, he would have been proud. And that thought, more than anything else, felt like permission to keep going, to keep trying, to keep building this new life I was only just beginning to understand. The summer was barely half over. Everything had already changed. And somehow, impossibly, I knew this was just the beginning. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of discovery and work. I spent my mornings writing and rewriting the piece about my father, hunting every sentence, every word, trying to capture not just what I'd seen but what it meant. Ruth had given me notes: tighten this, expand here, show don't tell, and I worked obsessively to meet her standards, to prove I belonged in this world of professional writers. My afternoons I spent exploring the city. Sarah had found work at a bookstore in the village, a cramped, dusty place called the Strand that claimed to have 18 miles of books and seemed to be telling the truth. She worked the afternoon shift, and I'd often meet her there, browsing the shelves, discovering writers I'd never heard of, filling my head with words and ideas and possibilities. Deborah was out most days photographing. She was working on a series about the city's changing neighborhoods, documenting the tension between old residents and new, poverty and gentrification, tradition and change. Sometimes I'd go with her, watching as she worked, learning to see the city through her lens. "Photography is about attention," she told me one afternoon as we walked through Harlem. "It's about noticing what other people miss. The same thing you do with words, I do with images. We're both just trying to capture truth." She showed me how to look not just at the obvious things but at the details. The way light fell across a fire escape, the expression on a shop owner's face, the graffiti that told stories about who lived in a neighborhood and what they believed. Every street corner was a novel, every face a short story waiting to be told. I took notes constantly, filling notebook after notebook with observations. The old Italian men playing bocce in a park, the Puerto Rican kids opening a fire hydrant on a sweltering day, dancing in the spray, the homeless veteran on the corner of 8th Street, his sign reading "Vietnam vet, hungry, God bless," his eyes empty of everything but pain. That last one haunted me. I sat down next to him one day, asked if I could buy him lunch. We went to a diner and he told me his story: 3 tour in Vietnam, came home to find his wife gone, his job gone, his mind fractured by things he'd seen and done. He'd been on the streets for 6 months. "Your brother?" he asked, noticing something in my face when he mentioned Vietnam. "Tommy," I said, "he died there in June." The vet nodded slowly. "I'm sorry, kid, real sorry. He was one of the good ones, I bet." "How do you know?" "Because you're here asking me to lunch instead of walking past like I'm invisible. Your brother taught you that, to see people, to care, that's rare." I wrote about him that night, about our conversation, about the invisible army of veterans returning to a country that wanted to forget them, wanted to pretend the war wasn't happening or wasn't costing what it cost. I didn't know if I'd ever publish it, but I needed to write it, needed to bear witness. Sarah noticed the change in me, the intensity with which I was approaching everything. "You're different here," she said one night as we lay on our lumpy couch, Deborah already asleep in her bedroom. "Maury alive somehow, Maury yourself." "I feel different," I admitted. "In Millfield, I was always Tommy's little brother or my father's son or just the kid from the gas station. Here, nobody knows who I'm supposed to be. I get to figure it out fresh." "And who are you figuring out you are?" I thought about it: someone who pays attention, someone who tells stories about people who usually don't get their stories told, someone who, I paused, trying to articulate it, someone who matters, maybe, who does work that matters. "You always mattered, Jack," Sarah said softly. Even in Millfield, even pumping gas, you mattered to your parents, to Tommy, to everyone who knew you. That's not what I mean. I mean mattering beyond my immediate circle, making a difference, telling truths that need telling. Does that sound arrogant? It sounds like purpose, Sarah said. That's not arrogant, that's knowing what you're for. She was changing too, I noticed. The girl I'd met at the gas station had been confident but searching, running from expectations but not quite running toward anything specific. Now she was finding her footing, discovering what she wanted beyond just freedom from her parents' plans. She'd started taking classes at a community center, photography, creative writing, even a political organizing workshop. She attended poetry readings and protests, threw herself into the village's countercultural scene with enthusiasm that sometimes worried me. "Don't you ever rest?" I asked her one evening when she came home at midnight from a meeting about tenant rights. "Rest is for people who aren't trying to change the world," she said, but she was smiling, teasing. "Besides, this is what I came here for, Jack, to be part of something bigger than myself, to contribute, to matter, to make a difference." We were both finding our purposes, I realized, both becoming the people we'd left home to become. But there was tension too, cracks forming in our perfect partnership. Sarah was more radical than I was, more willing to embrace the revolutionary rhetoric that pervaded the village. She went to meetings of students for a democratic society, talked about overthrowing the system, about revolution and resistance. She used words like fascist and piggy to describe the police and government. It made me uncomfortable, partly because of my upbringing, partly because of Tommy. My brother had died serving that government, believing in that system. How could I now denounce it completely? How could I reconcile honoring Tommy's sacrifice with agreeing that the whole system was corrupt and needed to be torn down? "You're too moderate," Sarah said one night after I'd declined to go with her to a particularly radical meeting. "You can't straddle the fence forever, Jack. You're either part of the solution or part of the problem. Or maybe I'm part of the vast majority that thinks both sides have some good points," I countered. "Not everyone fits into neat categories of revolutionary or reactionary. That kind of thinking is what lets injustice continue," she said. "Moderate voices enable extremism by refusing to take a stand." I do take stands. I write about what I see honestly and truthfully. That's my contribution. Writing isn't enough, not anymore. The time for words is passing, Jack. We need action. We didn't fight exactly, but there was distance growing between us, a philosophical gap that I didn't know how to bridge. Deborah noticed, of course. One afternoon when Sarah was at work and I was home writing, she brought it up. "You two are struggling," she observed, sitting at the kitchen table with her coffee. "Is it that obvious?" To someone paying attention, yes, want to talk about it. I set down my pen. I don't know if we want the same things anymore. Or maybe we never did, and we just didn't realize it because we were both so focused on leaving home that we didn't think about what we were leaving toward. "That's insightful," Deborah said, "and probably true. Sarah's an activist at heart. She needs a cause, needs to feel like she's fighting for something. You're different. You're an observer, a chronicler. You process the world through art, through storytelling. Neither approach is wrong, but they're different. So what do I do?" You figure out what you can live with and what you can't. You talk to her honestly about your fears and your needs. And you accept that sometimes people come into our lives for a season, not a lifetime. Sometimes the person who helps you escape is not the person who helps you build. Her words strung because they rang true. Sarah had been my escape, my ticket out of Millfield, my partner in adventure. But were we building something lasting or just sharing a moment? I didn't know, and not knowing scared me. 2 weeks after my meeting with Ruth, my article was published. I saw it first thing in the morning, having gone to a newsstand to buy a copy of the East Village Other as soon as they opened. And there it was on page 3, Working Hands, a son's reflection on his father's life by Jack Miller. Seeing my name in print, my words transformed from handwritten scrawl to typed text, was surreal. This was real. I was a published writer, not just someone who wrote in notebooks, but someone whose work existed in the world for strangers to read. I bought 5 copies, one for me, one for Sarah, one for Deborah, and 2 to mail home to my parents. Back at the apartment, Sarah hugged me hard and Deborah insisted we go out to celebrate. We went to a bar in the village where writers and artists gathered, a dark place with sticky floors and cheap beer where everyone seemed to know everyone else. Deborah introduced me around. "This is Jack. He just got his first byline in the EVO," and people congratulated me like I'd accomplished something significant. A woman named Maria, who wrote for an underground feminist newspaper, asked if I'd be interested in writing a piece about gender expectations in small-town America. A bearded poet named Lawrence said he admired my unadorned prose style and invited me to read at an open mic night. I felt like I was being admitted into a club I hadn't known I was auditioning for. The club of people who made things, who contributed to culture, who mattered beyond their immediate circles. It was intoxicating. We stayed at the bar until late, drinking and talking and laughing. Sarah was in her element, debating politics and philosophy with anyone who'd engage. Deborah held court at a corner table, showing prints from her latest project, and I sat at the bar nursing a beer, watching it all and taking mental notes. This was my life now, this was who I was becoming. Around midnight, slightly drunk and very happy, I called home from a pay phone on the street. My mother answered on the second ring. Jack, her voice was thick with sleep and worry. Is everything okay? It's so late. Everything's fine, Mom, better than fine. I got published. My first article in a New York newspaper, I'm mailing you a copy. Silence on the other end. Then, oh sweetheart, oh Jack, I'm so proud of you, your father will be so proud. How are you guys doing? I asked, really. We're managing, taking it day by day. The house is so quiet without you boys, but we're keeping busy. Your father at the station, me with the church auxiliary, we're managing. I miss you, I said, surprised by how true it was. I'd been so focused on moving forward that I hadn't let myself feel the loss of home, of family. We miss you too, baby, every day, but we're glad you're happy. We want you to be happy. Is Dad there? Can I talk to him? He's asleep, but I'll tell him you called. Tell him about your article, he'll want to read it. Tell him, I struggled to find words. Tell him I'm using what he taught me, about paying attention, about seeing value in ordinary work, about, I couldn't finish. I'll tell him, my mother said gently. He knows, Jack, he knows you're making him proud. After I hung up, I stood on that New York street corner, listening to the city's endless noise and let myself cry. For home, for Tommy, for the boy I'd been and the man I was trying to become. For the family I'd left and the life I was building. Sarah found me there, put her arms around me. You okay? She asked. Yeah, I said, wiping my eyes, just missing home, missing them. That's allowed, she said. You can build a new life and still miss the old one. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. We walked back to the apartment slowly, taking the long way, enjoying the warm summer night. The streets were still busy, New York never really slept, and we passed clubs with music spilling out, all-night diners full of insomniacs and shift workers, homeless people sleeping in doorways, lovers kissing on corners. Thank you, I said to Sarah as we climbed the stairs to Deborah's apartment, for everything, for stopping at that gas station, for staying in Millfield when you could have left, for bringing me here. None of this happens without you. You would have gotten here eventually, she said. Maybe not as fast, maybe not this summer, but you would have made it. This is who you are, Jack. You're someone who was always meant to write, meant to tell stories. I just helped speed up the timeline. Still, thank you. She kissed me on the landing, soft and sweet, and for a moment the distance I'd been feeling between us disappeared. For a moment we were just Jack and Sarah, two kids finding their way in the big city, partners in adventure. But as we settled onto our couch for the night, as I lay there listening to her breathe, I couldn't shake Deborah's words. Sometimes the person who helps you escape is not the person who helps you build. Was Sarah the person who'd help me build? Or was she just my summer, my transition, my bridge from who I was to who I would become? I didn't know, but I suspected, with a sadness I couldn't quite name, that the answer would reveal itself sooner rather than later. And I suspected I wouldn't like it. The summer rolled on, July became August. The city sweltered under a heat wave that made walking more than a few blocks feel like swimming through soup. Fire hydrants burst open in every neighborhood. People slept on fire escapes and rooftops, seeking any relief from the oppressive heat. I kept writing. Ruth published 2 more of my pieces, one about the Vietnam vet I'd met, one about immigrant shop owners in the East Village. Other papers started noticing, started reaching out. Nothing with significant pay yet, but exposure, connections, opportunities. I was building a reputation as a writer who captured ordinary people with empathy and insight. The poet of the working class, one editor called me, which made me both proud and embarrassed. Sarah became more involved in activist circles. She was gone most nights now, at meetings or protests or organizing sessions. She'd come home late, exhausted and exhilarated, smelling of cigarette smoke and possibility. We drifted slowly but inevitably, still together, still caring about each other, but moving in different directions, like 2 rivers that had run parallel for a while before geography demanded they diverge. The conversation we both knew was coming finally happened on a Wednesday night in mid-August. Sarah came home around 11, found me on the couch reading. Deborah was at a gallery opening, so we were alone. "We need to talk," Sarah said, and those 4 words contained everything. "Yeah," I agreed, "we do." She sat beside me, took my hand. "I love you, Jack, I want you to know that. What we've had this summer, it's been real and important, and I'll treasure it forever." "But," I prompted, hearing the unspoken word. "But I'm leaving," she said. "Not right away, not for a few weeks. But I've been accepted into a program in California, community organizing, political action, grassroots movements. It's exactly what I want to do, who I want to be, and I need to do it." "Without me," I said, "it wasn't a question." "Jack, you don't want this life, not really. You're a writer and observer, you process the world through art, that's beautiful and important and necessary. But it's not my path. I need to be in the streets, in the fight, making change with my hands and my body and my voice. We want different things." She was right, and we both knew it, but knowing it didn't make it hurt less. "So this summer," I said slowly, "this whole thing, was it just a transition, just us helping each other escape?" "No," Sarah said firmly. "It was real, it is real, but real things don't always last forever, Jack. Sometimes they're perfect for exactly as long as they need to be, and then they change into something else. That's not failure, that's just life." "What happens now?" "Now we finish the summer, we enjoy the time we have left. We don't pretend it's more or less than what it is. And when I leave for California, we say goodbye with love and gratitude, and we let each other go to become who we're meant to be." I wanted to argue, wanted to say we could make it work, could find a way to bridge our differences. But I knew she was right. We'd been diverging for weeks. This conversation was just acknowledging what we'd both already known. "I'm going to miss you," I said, my voice thick. "I'm going to miss you too," she said. "But Jack, you're going to be fine, better than fine. You're going to be extraordinary. You're going to write things that matter, tell stories that change how people see the world. That's your destiny, and you don't need me for that, you never did." We held each other on that lumpy couch and cried together, not for what we were losing, but for what we'd had, for what we'd given each other, for the beautiful, brief moment when our paths had aligned perfectly. And somehow, even in the sadness, there was relief. Relief that we didn't have to pretend anymore, didn't have to force something that was naturally ending. We could let go with love instead of resentment, with gratitude instead of bitterness. That was a gift too. That was, perhaps, the final lesson of our summer together. The last 2 weeks of August felt both endless and impossibly brief. Sarah and I existed in a strange limbo, still together, still caring for each other, but with the knowledge of ending coloring everything we did. Every kiss felt like goodbye. Every conversation carried the weight of finality. But we tried to make it good, to honor what we'd shared by finishing it well. We went to Coney Island on a Saturday, took the subway to the end of the line and spent the day walking the boardwalk, riding the Cyclone until we were sick and laughing, eating hot dogs and cotton candy like the kids we still were, despite everything that had happened. Sarah took pictures of the ocean, the rides, the tired faces of parents chasing children, and me squinting into the sun, smiling despite the sadness underneath. "For the project," she said, meaning our collaborative journal, "so you remember this, remember us." "I'll never forget," I promised, and I meant it. We saw a show at the Fillmore East, Janis Joplin, raw and powerful, her voice like sandpaper and honey, singing about freedom and pain and love. Sarah cried during "Piece of My Heart," gripping my hand so tight it hurt. I wondered if she was crying for the music or for us, but I didn't ask. Some things didn't need explaining. We walked through Central Park at dawn one morning, the city still mostly asleep, watching the sun rise over the reservoir. A few joggers passed us, determined and solitary. Birds sang in the trees. The air smelled clean, washed by overnight rain. "This is my favorite time," Sarah said, "before the city wakes up, before it becomes chaos, when it's just peaceful possible." "You'll come back," I said, "to New York someday, when you've changed the world and need a break." "Maybe," she said, "or maybe I'll change and the city will change and we'll both be different things by then. That's okay too. Everything changes, Jack, that's the one constant." Deborah threw us a goodbye party the night before Sarah left, nothing fancy, just friends crammed into her apartment, cheap wine and cheese and crackers, music playing from her stereo. The same crowd from the bar plus some new faces. Everyone had stories about their own journeys, their own escapes from small towns and suffocating expectations. To Sarah, Deborah toasted, raising her glass. "For having the courage to keep moving, keep seeking, keep becoming. May she change the world, or at least her corner of it." To Sarah, we all echoed. Sarah gave a short speech, thanking everyone for making New York feel like home, for accepting her, for teaching her. Then she turned to me. "And to Jack," she said, her voice catching slightly, "for reminding me that kindness and observation are revolutionary acts too, for showing me that you don't have to choose between heart and head, between caring and creating. You're going to do important work, Jack Miller. The world needs your voice." I couldn't speak, so I just raised my glass and hoped she understood everything I couldn't say. The party went late. People drifted out slowly until it was just Sarah, Deborah, and me, sitting in the quiet apartment surrounded by empty bottles and the detritus of celebration. "I should finish packing," Sarah said, but she didn't move. "I can help," I offered. "No," she said gently. "I need to do this myself, but thank you for everything, Jack, for being exactly who you are." She kissed me one last time, a real kiss, full of everything we'd shared and everything we'd never be. And then she went to Deborah's bedroom where she'd been staying the past few days, giving Deborah and me the living room, creating some distance to make the transition easier. Deborah and I sat in silence for a while. "You holding up?" she finally asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "I knew this was coming, we both did, but knowing and feeling are different things." "They always are," Deborah agreed. "Love is strange that way. Even when you know it's right to let go, it still hurts. That's how you know it mattered." "Did you ever?" I trailed off, not sure how to ask. "Have someone like Sarah, someone who changed everything?" Deborah smiled sadly. "Yeah, her name was Carol. We were together for 2 years until she moved to San Francisco to be part of the scene there. That was 3 years ago. I still think about her sometimes, wonder how she's doing, if she's happy." "Do you regret letting her go?" "No," Deborah said without hesitation. "I loved her, but I wasn't willing to give up New York, and she wasn't willing to stay. We wanted different things. That doesn't diminish what we had, it just means it had a natural ending, like a book that's exactly as long as it needs to be, no more, no less." "That's a good way to think about it." "It's the only way to think about it if you want to stay sane." She stood, stretched. "Get some sleep, Jack. Tomorrow's going to be hard. You'll need your strength." But I didn't sleep much. I lay on the couch, listening to the city sounds, thinking about everything that had happened since that Tuesday afternoon when a white Impala pulled up to the gas station. 10 weeks, that's all it had been. 10 weeks since Sarah arrived in my life. 10 weeks since Tommy died. 10 weeks since I left Millfield. In 10 weeks, my entire world had transformed. I'd lost a brother, left home, traveled across the country, fallen in love, become a published writer, discovered a city and a purpose. I'd started becoming someone new. And tomorrow, the person who'd catalyzed all that change would drive away, and I'd have to figure out how to keep becoming without her. The thought terrified me, but it also excited me, because Sarah was right. I didn't need her to do this. I never had. She'd opened doors, but I had to walk through them myself. Tomorrow would hurt, but the day after and the day after that, I'd keep writing, keep observing, keep building this new life. That's what survivors did. That's what Tommy would have done. Sarah left early Sunday morning, wanting to beat the traffic out of the city. Deborah had already said her goodbyes the night before, giving us privacy for this final moment. We stood on the sidewalk next to her white Impala, now dusty and covered with stickers from various states, evidence of her journey. She'd packed efficiently, everything she owned fitting in the trunk and back seat, ready for the cross-country drive back to California. "This is it," she said, trying to smile. "The part where I drive away and you wave from the curb like in the movies." "I hate this part in movies," I said. "It's always so sad." "Life is sad sometimes," Sarah said. "That's what makes the happy parts matter." I handed her an envelope. "I wrote you something, not a love letter exactly, Maury-like, a thank you letter for everything. Don't read it until you're on the road, okay?" "Okay," she said, tucking it into her purse. Then she handed me something, our collaborative journal, the one we'd been building all summer. "This is for you. I made copies of the photos I want to keep, but the original belongs to you. You're the writer. Tell this story. Someday, when enough time has passed, write about this summer, about us, make it mean something." "It already means something," I said, taking the journal. "Then make sure other people understand what it means. That's your job, Jack, bearing witness, telling the truth, making people see what they're too busy or too scared to notice." We hugged for a long time, holding each other like we could somehow preserve this moment, make it last. But eventually, inevitably, we had to let go. "Be great," Sarah whispered. "Promise me you'll be great." "Only if you promise to change the world," I countered. "Deal." She got in her car, started the engine. I stood on the sidewalk, watching, fulfilling my role in this movie scene we were enacting. She rolled down her window. "Jack." "Yes." "It was real, all of it, the best summer of my life, don't ever doubt that." "I won't," I promised. Then she drove away, her white Impala disappearing into New York traffic, carrying with it a piece of my heart and a whole season of my life. I stood there long after she'd gone, holding our journal, feeling the weight of everything it represented. Then I went back upstairs to Deborah's apartment and did the only thing I knew how to do when I was overwhelmed. I wrote, "Dear Sarah, by the time you read this, you'll be on the road, heading back to California to change the world. And you will change it, I have no doubt. You're a force of nature, a comet, exactly like I said that night by the lake in Ohio. I'm not good at saying goodbye, so I'm writing this instead. Writing is what I do when spoken words fail me, when the feelings are too big for my mouth to handle, but my hands can still translate them onto paper. Thank you doesn't seem big enough for what you've given me. You didn't just drive me to New York. You drove me toward myself, toward the person I was supposed to become but didn't know how to reach. Before you, I was just Jack Miller, the kid from the gas station, Tommy's little brother, someone defined by other people's expectations and my own fears. You showed me I could be more, that I was allowed to want more, to reach for more, to become more. You taught me that leaving isn't betrayal, that choosing your own path, even when it disappoints people you love, isn't selfish, it's necessary. It's how we become real instead of just reflections of what others want us to be. You taught me to pay attention to beauty, to stop for the detours, to understand that the journey matters as much as the destination, maybe more. And you taught me about love, not the fairy tale kind that lasts forever, but the real kind that's perfect for exactly as long as it needs to be, and then transforms into something else, something still beautiful, just different. I love you, Sarah Brennan, not in the way that needs forever, but in the way that's grateful for now, for what we had, what we shared, what we gave each other. You're going to do extraordinary things. You're going to fight for justice and equality and all the right causes. You're going to make people uncomfortable and challenge the status quo and refuse to settle for how things are. And I'm going to write about it, not about you specifically, that would be exploitative, would reduce what we had to material, but about this moment in time, this summer when everything changed, about young people finding their courage, leaving home, refusing to accept the world as they found it. About 1969 and all it meant. Thank you for stopping at that gas station. Thank you for staying in Millfield when you could have left. Thank you for bringing me here, for believing in me, for seeing something in my scribbled notebooks that I didn't know was there. Thank you for loving me, even though we both knew it wouldn't last forever. Some loves are meant to be chapters, not entire books. Ours was a perfect chapter, I'll treasure it always. Go change the world, Sarah. I'll be watching from here, telling the stories, bearing witness, doing my part in the only way I know how. And maybe someday, years from now, our paths will cross again. We'll get coffee and share stories and laugh about this summer when we were young and scared and brave all at once. We'll be different people by then, shaped by all the years between, but we'll remember who we were together, and that memory will be sweet. Until then, be great, be fierce, be everything you're meant to be. With love and gratitude. Jack. I spent the rest of that Sunday in the apartment, grieving and processing and slowly accepting. Deborah left me alone, understanding that some feelings needed to be felt in solitude. But Monday morning, she knocked on the bathroom door while I was shaving. Jack, Ruth called, she wants to meet with you this afternoon, says she has an opportunity, something big. What kind of opportunity? I called through the door. She didn't say, just said to be at her office at 2, and Jack, wash your face and put on a clean shirt, this sounds important. Ruth's office looked the same as it had 2 months ago, cramped, chaotic, covered in papers and coffee cups and the debris of constant deadline pressure, but Ruth herself looked different, less harried, more focused, like she'd made a decision and was ready to execute it. Jack, she said when I walked in, sit down, I'll make this quick because I know you're probably still reeling from your girlfriend leaving. How did you? Deborah told me, small world, smaller scene, everyone knows everyone else's business in the village. She shuffled papers on her desk. Look, I've been watching your work, not just what you've written for me, but the pieces you've placed with other papers. You're good, Jack, really good. You have a voice, a perspective, a way of seeing ordinary people that makes readers care about them. Thank you, I said, not sure where this was going. I'm starting something new, Ruth continued. A series of in-depth profiles about Americans dealing with this moment we're in, the war, the cultural changes, the generation gap, all of it. I want real voices from real places, not just coastal elite perspectives. I want to know what's happening in the heartland, in small towns, in the places everyone ignores until election season. Okay, I said carefully. I want you to write them, Ruth said bluntly. I want you to go back to places like Millfield, not Millfield itself, but places like it. Small towns across the Midwest, the South, Appalachia. I want you to interview people, tell their stories, capture what this moment feels like for Americans who aren't radicals or revolutionaries. Regular people just trying to live their lives, raise their families, make sense of a world that's changing too fast. My heart was pounding. You want me to travel, to write a whole series? 6 pieces minimum, maybe more if the series does well. I can pay you not much but enough to cover expenses and have a little left over. You'd be on the road for a few months, probably through the fall. Think you can handle it? Could I handle it? It was exactly what I'd wanted, a chance to write something meaningful, to use my skills to tell stories that mattered, to do work that would honor Tommy's memory by capturing the America he'd died defending, in all its complexity and contradiction. Yes, I said without hesitation, absolutely yes. Good, Ruth pulled out a contract. Read this, sign it if you agree to the terms. I need your first piece by October 1st. You pick the town, you pick the people. Just make it real, make it honest, make it hurt in the places where truth hurts. Can you do that? I can do that, I said, signing the contract before she could change her mind. Walking out of Ruth's office, contract in hand, I felt something shift inside me. The grief over Sarah was still there, it would be for a while, but underneath it something else was growing. Purpose, direction, a sense that I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do. I called my parents from a pay phone, told them about the assignment. "You're coming home?" my mother asked, and I heard the hope in her voice. "Not to Millfield," I said gently, "but I'll be in Indiana in towns like ours. And Mom, I'll come visit soon, I promise. I want to see you guys, tell you about everything, show you what I've been doing." "We'd like that," she said, and she was crying, but it sounded like happy crying. "We'd like that very much, sweetheart." That night, Deborah and I sat on the fire escape outside her apartment, drinking cheap wine and watching the city lights. "So you're leaving too," she said. "Everyone leaves eventually." "Not forever, I'll be back. New York is. It's home now, I think, or as close to home as I have outside of Millfield." "You're welcome here anytime," Deborah said. "The cooch is yours whenever you need it. That's what family does, we hold space for each other." "Family," I repeated, testing the word. "Is that what we are?" "We're the family we choose," Deborah said. "Not bound by blood but by shared values, shared struggles, shared dreams. That's more powerful than biology, Jack. That's intentional love." We sat in silence for a while, watching the endless motion of the city below us. "Can I ask you something?" I said eventually. "Something I've been wondering since Sarah left." "Anything." "How do you know when you're done becoming? When you've figured out who you are and can stop searching?" Deborah laughed softly. "You never stop, Jack. That's the secret they don't tell you. You never finish becoming. You just keep evolving, keep changing, keep discovering new facets of yourself. The person you are at 20 isn't the person you'll be at 30 or 50 or 80. That's not failure, that's life. So I'll always feel like this, like I'm searching for something I can't quite name." "No," Deborah said, "you'll feel different things at different times, sometimes lost, sometimes found, sometimes both at once. But that restlessness you feel, that need to keep moving, keep discovering, that's not a bug, Jack, that's a feature. That's what makes you a writer, an artist. People who are satisfied don't create, people who ache do." "That's not very comforting," I said. "Truth rarely is," Deborah agreed, "but it's better than comfortable lies." We finished our wine as the night deepened around us. Somewhere in the city, people were falling in love and breaking up, being born and dying, succeeding and failing, living out their own stories. And I would tell some of those stories, bear witness to some of those lives, try to capture the truth of this moment for people who came after. That was my purpose, my calling, my way of honoring Tommy, honoring Sarah, honoring everyone who'd shaped me into who I was becoming. The summer of 1969 was ending. In 3 weeks, I'd leave New York, start traveling, begin the work Ruth had hired me to do. But tonight I was here on this fire escape, in this city with this friend, feeling the weight and wonder of everything that had changed. Tommy was dead, Sarah was gone, Millfield was behind me, the boy I'd been had vanished somewhere on that drive across the country. But I was still here, still breathing, still creating, still becoming. And that, I was learning, was enough. That was everything. September arrived with a change in the air. The brutal heat broke, replaced by cooler nights and mornings that hinted at autumn. The city felt different, energized, renewed, as if the whole place had been holding its breath all summer and could finally exhale. I spent those first 2 weeks of September preparing for my trip. I bought a used car, a beat-up Ford Falcon that cost $200 and looked like it might not survive the journey but had good bones, according to the mechanic Deborah knew. I packed notebooks and pens, a camera Deborah gave me, document everything, she insisted. Clothes suitable for small-town interviews, and a sleeping bag in case motels were too expensive. But before I left New York to start my work, I knew I needed to go home. Really home. back to Millfield to see my parents, to visit Tommy's grave, to close that chapter properly before beginning the next one. I called ahead, told my mother I was coming for a few days. She cried with happiness, then immediately started planning meals, making up my old room, telling everyone in town that Jack was coming home. Just for a visit, I clarified. I'm not staying, Mom, I have work to do, but I want to see you guys, want to show you I'm okay. I understand, she said, though I could hear the disappointment underneath. A visit is enough, more than enough. I drove out of New York on a Friday morning in mid-September, the city slowly disappearing in my rearview mirror. The drive took all day through Pennsylvania, Ohio, into Indiana as the sun began to set, and as I got closer to Millfield, as the landscape became more familiar, I felt something unexpected. Not dread or regret, but a kind of bittersweet nostalgia. This place had been my whole world once. These roads, these fields, these small towns with their water towers and grain elevators, they'd formed me, shaped me, given me the foundation I was building on. I'd needed to leave, but I was also grateful for what I'd left behind. The sun was setting as I pulled into Millfield, painting the sky those familiar golds and pinks. The town looked exactly the same houses, the same streets, the same pace of life that seemed untouched by the chaos of the wider world. The sign still read Pop, 3247, nobody having bothered to change it yet. But I was different, completely, fundamentally different from the boy who'd left 3 months ago. My parents were waiting on the porch, just like they'd been the morning I left, but now they were smiling, waving, hurrying down the steps to greet me. My mother reached me first, pulling me into a hug so tight I could barely breathe. "Look at you," she said, pulling back to study my face. "You look older, thinner. Are you eating enough?" "I'm eating fine, Mom," I said, laughing. "New York has plenty of food." My father shook my hand, then pulled me into a brief, fierce hug. "Good to have you home, son, even if it's just for a few days." "Good to be home, Dad." Inside, the house smelled like pot roast, Tommy's favorite, mine too, and fresh bread and apple pie. My mother had cooked like she was feeding an army, and I understood this was her way of showing love, of making sure I knew I was still wanted, still welcome, still part of this family even though I'd left. We ate dinner at the kitchen table, the three of us, and the empty chair didn't hurt quite as much as it had. It was still there, still noticeable, but the sharp edge of grief had dulled slightly. We could sit here now without breaking, could talk and laugh and share a meal without every moment being colored by absence. My mother asked 1,000 questions about New York, about the apartment, about my writing, about friends I'd made. I told them about Deborah, about the East Village Other, about the articles I'd published. I showed them the copies I'd brought, watched my father read them slowly, carefully, his face betraying nothing until he looked up. "These are good, Jack," he said simply. "Real good, you've got a gift, a real gift." Coming from him, a man who didn't waste words on false praise, it meant everything. I told them about Sarah too, not everything, but enough. How we'd met, how she'd helped me leave, how we'd spent the summer together before she'd gone back to California to pursue her own dreams. "I'm sorry it didn't work out," my mother said. "She seemed like such a nice girl." "It did work out," I corrected gently, "just not the way you might think. We got exactly what we needed from each other. Sometimes that's enough, sometimes that's perfect." My father nodded like he understood. Maybe he did. Maybe at his age, with his experiences, he understood that not every relationship had to last forever to matter. After dinner, I helped my mother with dishes while my father went to sit on the porch with his pipe. It was comfortable, familiar, like slipping into an old sweater that still fit even though you'd grown. "Your father wants to talk to you," my mother said quietly as she handed me a plate to dry. "About the station. Don't let him pressure you, Jack. You've got your own path now." "I won't, Mom, I promise." Later, after my mother had gone to bed, I joined my father on the porch. The night was cool and clear, crickets singing, the streetlights casting pools of yellow on the pavement. It could have been any summer evening from my childhood, except everything was different now. "I'm proud of you," my father said without preamble, "for leaving, for taking the risk, for making something of yourself. That takes courage, real courage." "Thank you, Dad." "I wanted to talk to you about the station," he continued. "I've been thinking about it a lot since you left, about the future, about what happens when I can't run it anymore." My stomach tightened. Here it came, the pressure to come back, to take over, to fulfill the obligation I'd been running from. But that's not what he said. "I'm going to sell it," my father said, "not right away, but in the next year or two when I can find the right buyer, someone who'll keep it running, keep serving the community, but it won't be a Miller station anymore. That chapter is closing." I stared at him, shocked. "Dad, you don't have to do that because of me. If you want to keep it, if it's important to you. It was important, he interrupted, past tense. It gave me a purpose, a way to provide for my family, but my family is different now. Tommy's gone, you're building your own life. Your mother and I, we can live on less, simplify, maybe travel a little, see some of the country you're seeing. We're not old yet, Jack. We still have time to be something besides what we've always been. What changed? I asked. What made you decide this? He was quiet for a moment, puffing on his pipe. You did, he said finally. Watching you leave, watching you choose your own path even though it scared you, even though it meant disappointing us. That took guts, and it made me realize I'd been using the station as an excuse not to change, not to take my own risks. I'd been hiding behind duty and obligation instead of admitting I was just scared. Scared of what? Of not knowing who I am without it, he admitted. I've been John Miller, owner of Miller's gas station for 30 years. Take that away and who am I? That's a terrifying question, but it's also a necessary one. You taught me that, son. You taught me that becoming someone new is better than staying someone you've outgrown. We sat in silence for a while, both of us processing this conversation, this shift in our relationship. My father wasn't just my father anymore, he was a person, with his own fears and dreams and capacity for change. I'm sorry about Tommy, I said eventually. I know I said it before, but I need to say it again. I'm sorry he's gone, I'm sorry for everything we lost. Me too, my father said, his voice rough. Every damn day I'm sorry, but Jack, I'm also grateful. Grateful I had him for 18 years, grateful I have you. Grateful your mother and I are still here, still together, still able to choose what comes next. Grief doesn't cancel out gratitude, they coexist, that's what I'm learning. That's profound, Dad. Don't sound so surprised, he said, but he was smiling. Your old man has a thought or two occasionally. The next morning, I visited Tommy's grave. I went alone early before the day heated up. The cemetery was quiet except for birds and the distant sound of a lawn mower. Tommy's headstone was still new-looking, the inscription sharp and clear. Thomas Joseph Miller, 1950-11969. Beloved son and brother. Killed in action, Vietnam. Greater love, HATH no man. I sat on the grass beside his grave and talked to him the way I had as a kid, when I'd tell him everything and he'd listen and sometimes offer advice, but mostly just let me work through things out loud. I'm writing about you, I told him, not just about you dying but about you living, about who you were, what you meant. I want people to understand that you weren't just a name on a casualty list, just another statistic. You were a person, a brother, someone who mattered. The grass rustled in the breeze, a cardinal sang in a nearby tree, the world continued, indifferent. I met a girl, I continued. Sarah, you would have liked her, she's brave and smart and doesn't take any crap from anyone. She helped me leave, helped me figure out who I could be. We're not together anymore, but she mattered, she still matters. I pulled out my notebook and read him the article I'd written about our father, about the gas station, about working hands and quiet dignity. I wanted Tommy to hear it, to know that I was using my gift to honor the life he'd lived, the family we'd been. I miss you, I said when I finished, every day, but I'm also living, Tommy, really living the way you'd want me to. I'm not wasting this life you don't get to have, I'm making it count, I promise you that. I stayed for an hour just sitting there, feeling connected to my brother in a way I hadn't since he'd died. Death created distance, but love bridged it. He was gone, but he was also still here, still part of me, still shaping who I was becoming. Thank you, I said finally, standing up, brushing grass from my jeans, for being my brother, for teaching me how to be brave even when I didn't feel brave, for showing me that leaving doesn't mean you love people less. I'll make you proud, Tommy, that's my promise, I'll make you proud. I spent 3 days in Millfield, visiting old places and people, seeing the town through my new eyes. Everything was familiar but also strange, like a language I used to speak fluently but was starting to forget. I had coffee with Rosie at the diner, told her about New York. She gave me names of people in small towns she'd visited over the years, contacts who might help with my assignment. You're doing important work, she said, telling people's stories, making them visible. Don't ever think that's not enough, Jack. Stories are how we understand ourselves, how we connect with each other. You keep telling them. I stopped by the gas station one afternoon, helped my father with a few jobs, let my hands remember the familiar work. A customer I'd known my whole life, Mr. Peterson, with his dying Buick, asked what I was doing with myself. I'm a writer, I said, and this time I didn't feel like I was lying or exaggerating. I write about people and places, tell their stories. Well, good for you, Mr. Peterson said. World needs more storytellers, less politicians, more poets, that's what I always say. On my last night I went to Miller's Point alone, drove out there as the sun was setting, parked where Sarah and I had parked that first evening. The view was the same: fields stretching to the horizon, the river cutting through, the vast Indiana sky painted in impossible colors. But I was different. The boy who'd come here with Sarah, confused and grieving and desperate to escape, he didn't exist anymore. In his place was someone else, someone still forming, still discovering, but more solid, more certain. I thought about everything that had happened in this summer of 1969. Tommy's death, Sarah's arrival, leaving home, New York, the writing, the loving and losing, the becoming. It had been the worst summer and the best summer, the most painful and the most transformative, a summer when everything changed and nothing would ever be the same. And I was grateful for all of it, even the pain. Especially the pain, because pain was proof that I'd lived, that I'd felt, that I'd been brave enough to risk my heart. I pulled out my notebook and began to write, capturing this moment, this feeling, this ending that was also a beginning. The summer I turned 18, I learned that life doesn't pause for grief. The world keeps turning, people keep living, and you can either move with it or get left behind. I learned that love doesn't have to last forever to be real, that leaving home isn't betrayal, that becoming yourself is the bravest and hardest thing you'll ever do. I learned that my brother's death, as senseless and tragic as it was, gave me something too: permission to live fully, to take risks, to not waste the time he didn't get. His absence taught me to cherish presence. His silence taught me to speak. I learned that America is bigger and more complicated than I ever imagined from my small town in Indiana, that there's no single truth, no simple answer, that the same country that sent my brother to die in a jungle also created music and art and freedom that made people's souls sing, that contradictions don't cancel each other out, they just make the truth more complex. Most importantly, I learned that you never stop becoming, that the person you are today isn't the person you'll be tomorrow, and that's not failure, that's life, that's growth, that's the whole point. The summer of 1969 was the last summer of my innocence, the last time I could pretend the world was simple, but it was also the first summer of my life, the real one, the one I chose, the one I built myself instead of inheriting. And that makes all the difference. I watched the sun disappear below the horizon, watched the stars begin to appear one by one in the darkening sky. Tomorrow I would leave Millfield again, head out to small towns across America to collect stories, to bear witness, to do the work I was meant to do. But tonight I was here in the place that made me, on the point where Tommy and I used to dream about the future. He didn't get his future, but I had mine, stretching out ahead of me, full of possibility and uncertainty and promise. I thought about Sarah, somewhere in California, fighting for justice and change. I thought about Deborah in her New York apartment, creating art that mattered. I thought about my parents, preparing to close one chapter and begin another. We were all becoming, all of us, in our own ways, figuring out who we were meant to be in this strange new world that was emerging from the ashes of the old one. And maybe that was the real story of 1969, not the moon landing or the war or the protests, though those mattered, but the individual transformations, the personal revolutions, the millions of private moments when people decided to become something more than what they'd been. That was my story to tell, that was my purpose. I started the car and drove back toward town, toward my parents' house, toward one last night in my childhood bedroom before heading out into the world again. The road stretched ahead, visible in my headlights, disappearing into darkness beyond, but I wasn't afraid of the darkness anymore. I'd learned that summer that sometimes you have to drive into the unknown, trust that the road continues even when you can't see where it leads. Sometimes you have to leave home to find it. Sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what really matters. And sometimes a single summer, 10 weeks of joy and pain and transformation, can change the entire trajectory of your life. That summer of 1969, everything changed. The world changed, America changed, I changed. And 50 years later, remembering it all, I can still feel the gasoline smell of that Indiana morning when a white Impala pulled into the station. I can still hear Sarah's laugh, Tommy's voice, my father's quiet wisdom. I can still feel the terror and exhilaration of driving away from everything I knew toward everything I'd become. It was the summer I lost my brother and found myself. The summer I fell in love and learned to let go. The summer I stopped being someone's son, someone's brother, someone's expectation, and started being just Jack, just me. The last summer of innocence. The first summer of everything. And I wouldn't change a single moment of it. Not one. Jack Miller went on to have a successful career as a journalist and author, writing extensively about ordinary Americans and their extraordinary lives. He published 3 books, won several awards, and never stopped telling the stories of people who might otherwise go unheard. He visited his parents regularly, and they did eventually travel, saw the Grand Canyon, visited New York, took a cruise to Alaska. His father sold the gas station in 1971 to a young veteran who kept it running for another 30 years. Jack never married, though he had several meaningful relationships. He stayed in touch with Deborah for the rest of his life, and they remained close friends and creative collaborators. He never saw Sarah Brennan again after that September morning, though he followed her career from a distance. She became a prominent activist and community organizer, did important work for civil rights and social justice, and lived a life of purpose and meaning. And every year on the anniversary of Tommy's death, Jack would visit the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C., and find his brother's name among the thousands of others. He'd touch it gently, remembering, and then he'd go home and write. Because that's what survivors do. They remember, they honor, they tell the stories. They live.